In the frozen Norse settlement, where a woman's worth is measured by the bride price she commands, Astrid has become invisible. Too soft, too round, too unmarriageable. The village whispers have carved themselves into her bones until she believes them. But when her brother's desperation leads him to strike a deal with the shadow that haunts the northern fjords, everything changes. The vampire Norseman who claims her isn't seeking a wife. He's seeking something far more dangerous: redemption. What happens when a woman who's been told she's worthless discovers she holds the power to save an immortal soul? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the smoke hole in Bjorn's longhouse, casting thin rays across the packed earth floor where Astrid knelt, grinding barley into flour. Her hands moved in the steady rhythm she'd perfected over the years, the same rhythm her mother had taught her before the fever took her. The stone was cold beneath her knees, but she barely noticed anymore. Cold had become as familiar as breathing. "Aunt Astrid, tell me the story about the Selkies again," Sigrid said, appearing at her elbow with sleep-tangled hair and bright eyes. The child was 7, gap-toothed and fearless in the way only children can be before the world teaches them otherwise. "Your father needs his porridge first." "Little one," Astrid replied, but her voice was gentle. Of all the people in this settlement, only Sigrid looked at her without pity or disgust. To the child, she was simply Aunt Astrid, the woman who told stories and braided her hair and made the best honey cakes when they could spare the honey. Bjorn entered from the back room, his face already creased with worry, though the day had barely begun. He'd aged 10 years in the two since his wife Inga died birthing their youngest. That baby had followed his mother within a week, and something in Bjorn had broken that never quite healed. He was Astrid's older brother by 5 years. But he looked ancient now at 32. "The debt collectors came by yesterday," he said without preamble, reaching for the ale horn Astrid had already filled. "Jarl Eriksson wants his payment by the new moon." Astrid kept grinding, though her stomach tightened. Bjorn had borrowed heavily to expand his farmland 2 seasons ago, betting on a good harvest. The harvest had been adequate, nothing more. Adequate didn't clear debts. "How much?" she asked. 3 marks of silver or equivalent trade goods." Bjorn drank deeply, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "I have perhaps 1/2 mark in livestock I can spare without starving us through winter." The settlement of Skarvik hugged the edge of the fjord like a child clinging to its mother's skirts. 40 families, give or take, depending on the season and the raiding parties. It was the only world Astrid had ever known. She'd been born here 24 winters ago, in this very longhouse when it belonged to her father. Her mother's silver wedding brooch, the oval one with the intricate knotwork, was the last beautiful thing she owned. She touched it now where it pinned her cloak, a habit born of needing to remember she'd once been meant for better things. "Aunt Astrid." "You're not listening," Sigrid complained, tugging at her sleeve. "I'm sorry, sweet one. Go wake your brothers. They'll be late for their lessons with the shipwright." As Sigrid scampered off, Astrid finally looked up at Bjorn. "What will you do?" He couldn't meet her eyes. That's when she knew. That's when the cold in her knees spread upward into her chest, into her throat, stealing her breath. "There's a man," Bjorn began, then stopped. Started again. "An outsider. He came to the Jarl's Hall 3 days ago. He's looking for a woman to manage his household. He's willing to pay generously." Astrid's hands stilled on the grinding stone. "I see. He's not like the others who've refused you, Astrid. He doesn't care about your appearance. He needs someone competent, someone who can read the old runes, someone who understands household management." "Someone no one else wants," she said quietly. Bjorn flinched. "That's not what I meant, but it was." They both knew it was. Astrid had been promised once, when she was 16, to a trader from the south. He'd taken one look at her, at the soft roundness that had settled on her frame after their mother died, and grief had driven her to find comfort in bread and cheese and anything that made the hollow feeling recede. And he'd called off the arrangement. said his family would mock him for bringing home such a wife. The humiliation had been complete and public. No other offers had come. She'd tried in the early years to shrink herself, eaten less, worked herself until exhaustion made her dizzy. But her body seemed determined to defy her wishes, holding on to every morsel as though preparing for a famine that never came. Eventually she'd stopped trying. What was the point? The village had already decided what she was: unmarriageable, a burden, a woman who would spend her life caring for other people's children because she'd never have her own. "Tell me about this man," she said, resuming her grinding. If she kept moving, kept her hands busy, she could pretend this was just another day, another disappointment in a long line of them. Bjorn hesitated. "His name is Halvard. He lives north of here in the mountains. He keeps to himself mostly, but he's known to the Jarl. Trades in furs and amber. He's offered to clear my entire debt in exchange for a woman to keep his household, and you offered me." "I thought you might welcome the change," Bjorn said, but his voice lacked conviction. "A household of your own to manage. A man who doesn't judge by the usual measures." Astrid looked at her brother, really looked at him, saw the desperation there, the shame, the calculation. He needed her to say yes. His children needed her to say yes. The alternative was losing the farm, perhaps being forced into bonded servitude to clear the debt. Sigrid, with her gap-toothed smile and her love of Selkie stories, would end up in another household, working her fingers raw for strangers. The weight of it settled on Astrid's shoulders like a physical thing. But then, she was used to carrying weight. What was one more burden? "When does he want an answer?" she asked. Relief flooded Bjorn's face, chased quickly by guilt. 3 days. He'll come for you himself if you agree. He was very specific about that. Said the contract must be witnessed and sealed properly. 3 days. 72 hours to say goodbye to the only life she'd ever known. To become, once again, a commodity traded to solve someone else's problem. But as she returned to grinding the barley, Astrid felt something unexpected stir beneath the resignation. Something that might have been curiosity, or might have been the faintest ember of hope. Because Bjorn hadn't mentioned one crucial detail, and his omission hung in the air between them like smoke. He hadn't said what Halvard looked like, hadn't described his age or his temperament, hadn't mentioned whether he was widowed or simply preferred solitude. The absence of information felt deliberate, and Astrid had lived long enough to know that when people avoided details, those details mattered. "Bjorn," she said softly. "Oh, what aren't you telling me about this man?" Her brother's face went pale. Outside, the morning sounds of the settlement continued, heedless of the moment that would change everything. Bjorn's silence stretched too long. He turned away, busying himself with his cloak, and that evasion told Astrid more than words could have. "The children say he's a draga," Bjorn finally said, his back still to her. "The old women claim he's been coming to these lands for generations, always looking the same. Never aging." Astrid's hands stilled on the grinding stone. "And you believe them?" "I believe the Jarl vouches for him. I believe his silver is real enough. I believe we have 3 days before Eriksson takes everything we have." Bjorn turned back, and his eyes held a plea. "What does it matter if people tell stories? They tell stories about you too, and you're as human as anyone." The comparison stung, though Astrid knew he hadn't meant it cruelly. She was a cautionary tale in Skarvik, the woman who ate her sorrow, the daughter whose body betrayed her mother's elegant legacy, the burden no man would shoulder. "When can I meet him?" she asked. "Tonight, at the Jarl's Hall. He wants to speak with you directly before the contract is drawn." That, at least, was something. She would have a voice in this transaction, however small. She nodded slowly, returning to her grinding. Bjorn left for the fields, and the morning passed in its usual rhythm. But everything felt different now, as though she were already halfway gone from this place. The Jarl's Hall stood at the settlement's center, larger than the others, its carved doorposts depicting wolves and ravens. Astrid had been inside only a handful of times. Tonight, As she crossed the threshold with Bjorn at her side, she felt the weight of watching eyes. The Jarl's wife, Solveig, sat near the fire with her women, their hands busy with spindles, their gazes sharp as they took in Astrid's arrival. "He waits in the back chamber," the Jarl said, barely glancing up from the chess game he played with his eldest son. "Go on." He requested privacy for the conversation. Astrid's stomach clenched, but she moved toward the door Jarl Eriksson had indicated. Bjorn started to follow, but she held up a hand. "This is my decision to make," she said quietly. "Wait here." For once, her brother didn't argue. The back chamber was smaller, warmer, lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on the walls. A man stood with his back to her, studying a tapestry that depicted some ancient battle. He was tall, broad-shouldered beneath a cloak of dark fur. His hair caught the lamplight, so pale it seemed almost silver. "You must be Astrid," he said without turning. His voice was deep, measured, with an accent she couldn't quite place. Old-fashioned, perhaps, the way her grandmother had spoken. "I am." "And you're Halvard." He turned then, and Astrid's breath caught. Not because he was handsome, though he was, in an austere way that reminded her of winter itself, but because of his eyes. They were pale grey, nearly colourless, and they looked at her with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Not pitied, not judged. "Simply seen. Your brother tells me you can read the old runes," Halvard said. "Is this true?" "My mother taught me before she died. I'm not as skilled as a proper skald, but I know the basics. Show me." He produced a small piece of carved bone from his cloak, held it out to her. Astrid took it, turning it in the lamplight. The runes were ancient, worn, but still legible. She traced them with her finger, feeling an odd warmth emanating from the carved surface. "It's a binding spell," she said slowly, "but not for protection, for keeping something contained, or someone." She looked up at him. "Where did you get this?" "It was given to me a very long time ago." Halvard took the bone back, tucked it away. "You read it correctly." "Few could. My mother had the gift of sight. She tried to teach me, but I never had her talent." "Perhaps you simply never had the right teacher." He moved closer, and Astrid noticed something odd. In the lamplight he cast no shadow. The flames flickered, the shadows danced, but where Halvard stood there was only emptiness. She took an involuntary step back. "You see it," he said. "Not a question." "Good. I need someone who sees clearly without illusions. The stories about you. Are they true?" "That depends on which stories you've heard." Halvard tilted his head, studying her with those colourless eyes. "I don't age as mortals do. I don't eat food or drink wine. I require sustenance of a different kind. The sun causes me pain, so I keep to the darkness. Does that frighten you?" It should have. Astrid knew it should have terrified her. But standing here, looking at this impossible man who cast no shadow, she felt something else entirely. Recognition, perhaps. The kinship of two beings who existed outside the normal bounds of their worlds. "The contract," she said. "What exactly are you asking of me?" "To manage my household through the winter. To provide companionship without expectation of anything more. To see me as I am, not as the stories paint me." He paused. "I won't lie to you, Astrid. There is danger in my home. My nature demands blood, and though I've learned control over many lifetimes, the hunger never fully sleeps. You would be safe from others, but from me." He shook his head slowly. "I can promise only that I will try, and in spring you may leave with enough silver to make your own way in the world. Or you may stay. The choice will be yours." Astrid looked down at her hands, work-roughened and capable. Hands that had spent years caring for other people's children, grinding other people's grain, living other people's lives. She thought of Sigrid's gap-toothed smile, of Bjorn's desperate relief, of the village women's pitying glances. "I have a condition," she said. Halvard's expression didn't change. "Name it. My brother's niece, Sigrid. If anything happens to me, I want her provided for. Education, dowry, whatever she needs. Put it in the contract." For the first time, something like respect flickered in those pale eyes. Agreed. Then I accept your terms. Halvard produced a rolled parchment from within his cloak, along with a small knife. The contract was already written in two scripts, one she recognized as Norse runes, the other older, stranger. At the bottom was space for their marks. Blood seal, he explained. The old way, the binding way. He pricked his thumb first, pressed it to the parchment. The blood that welled up was darker than it should have been, nearly black in the lamplight. Then he offered her the knife. Astrid took it, pressed the point to her own thumb. The pain was sharp and clean. She pressed her thumb beside his on the parchment, and the moment their blood touched, she felt something shift in the air around them, a thrumming like the earth itself taking note. The contract glowed briefly with a reddish light, then faded to normal parchment once more. 3 days, Halvard said. I'll come for you at dawn. He left without another word, and Astrid stood alone in the small chamber, looking at the blood drying on her thumb. Outside, she could hear the murmur of voices, Bjorn's among them, anxious and questioning. She had just traded herself to a creature out of legend, a vampire who cast no shadow and needed blood to survive. And the strangest part, the part she couldn't quite understand, was that she felt more alive in this moment than she had in years. The 3 days passed like water through cupped hands. Astrid moved through them in a strange state between dreaming and waking, aware that everything she touched might be for the last time, yet unable to feel the weight of it properly. Sigrid clung to her the morning after the contract was sealed. The child had woken from nightmares, crying that Aunt Astrid was going away with the Shadow Man and would never come back. Astrid held her close, breathing in the smell of her hair, barley and wood smoke and childhood. Listen to me, little one, she whispered. I'm going to a place in the mountains. It's not forever, and I've made sure you'll be cared for, no matter what happens. I don't want silver, Sigrid sobbed. I want you. There was no answer Astrid could give to that. She simply held the girl until the tears subsided, then braided her hair the way she liked it, with the small wooden beads Inga had carved before she died. The village women came, as she'd known they would. They brought things wrapped in cloth, their faces a mixture of pity and relief. Old Bergthora brought dried herbs and whispered instructions about warding off evil spirits. Jorunn, who'd once been kind before her own marriage turned bitter, brought a wool blanket and avoided Astrid's eyes. Even Solveig, the Jarl's wife, sent her serving girl with a packet of needles and good thread. They were glad to see her go. She understood that. She was a reminder of what could happen to a woman in this world, a cautionary tale made flesh. Her absence would let them breathe easier. On the second day, Astrid packed her few belongings into a leather satchel. 3 shifts, 2 overdresses, her mother's wedding brooch, a comb carved from bone, a small eating knife. It seemed a paltry accumulation for 24 years of living. She added the gifts from the village women, then sat on her sleeping bench and let her hands rest idle for the first time in memory. The longhouse was quiet. Bjorn had taken the children to help with repairs on the boat shed, giving her space to prepare. Or perhaps he simply couldn't bear to watch her pack. The guilt sat heavy on him. She could see it in the way he couldn't meet her eyes at meals, in the extra portions he tried to serve her, as though food could absolve him. She found herself thinking about her mother, as she often did in moments of transition. Ragnar had been slender, graceful, everything Astrid was not. But she'd also been kind, teaching Astrid the old ways when the other women said such knowledge was fading and unnecessary. The runes, the herb lore, the songs that carried power if you knew how to sing them properly. You have a gift, Astrid, her mother had said once, when Astrid was perhaps 10 years old. I can see it in you, the way I saw it in my own mother. But gifts can be heavy to carry. Sometimes they manifest in unexpected ways. At the time, Astrid had thought she meant the gift of sight, the ability to read runes and sense things beyond the ordinary. Now she wondered if her mother had meant something else entirely, if the weight that had settled onto Astrid's frame after Ragnar's death had been trying to tell her something she wasn't ready to hear. On the 3rd morning, Astrid woke before dawn. She dressed carefully in her best overdress, the deep blue one Inga had given her 2 winters past. She pinned her mother's brooch at her shoulder and braided her dark hair in the style married women wore, though she had no husband. It felt like armor, this careful presentation. Bjorn was already awake, feeding the fire. The children still slept. "I've left instructions for Sigrid's care," Astrid said quietly. "She'll need a woman's guidance soon. Bergthora has agreed to teach her weaving." "Astrid," Bjorn's voice cracked. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know." And she did. She could forgive him for his desperation, even if she couldn't forget the transaction that had made her a commodity once again. "Take care of them. That's all I ask." The sound of hoofbeats came from outside, though the sun had not yet risen. Astrid felt her heartbeat quicken. She took her satchel, wrapped herself in her warmest cloak, and stepped out into the cold morning air. Halvard waited beside a sledge harnessed to a large grey horse. He wore dark furs, and in the pre-dawn light he seemed almost translucent, as though he were made of mist and shadow rather than flesh. When he saw her, he inclined his head in greeting. "You came prepared," he observed, noting her satchel. "I'm not one for lengthy farewells." "Neither am I." He gestured to the sledge. "The journey will take most of the day. There are furs for warmth." Astrid climbed into the sledge without looking back at the longhouse. She couldn't bear to see if Bjorn watched from the doorway, or worse, if he didn't. The sledge was well appointed, with thick furs and a canvas cover that could be pulled up against wind and snow. Halvard took his place at the front, gathering the reins. The horse started forward without any visible command from him, as though it knew the way by instinct. They left Skarvik as the first light touched the eastern sky, turning the fjord waters to molten silver. Astrid watched the settlement recede behind them, growing smaller and smaller until it was just a cluster of dark shapes against the snow. She felt hollowed out, scraped clean, ready to be filled with whatever came next. "You're quiet," Halvard said after they'd travelled for perhaps an hour. The path had turned north, following the coastline before curving inland toward the mountains. "I'm thinking about what you've left behind, about what I'm moving toward." Astrid pulled the furs closer around her shoulders. "You said you need someone who sees clearly. What did you mean by that?" Halvard was silent for a long moment. The only sounds were the sledge runners cutting through snow and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves. "I've lived a very long time, Astrid. Long enough to watch generations bloom and wither like flowers. Most people, when they discover what I am, they see only the monster. They can't look past the hunger, the darkness, the unnatural span of my years. They see a draugr, a creature from the old stories meant to frighten children. And what should they see? A man who made mistakes. A man who was punished for those mistakes. A man who has spent lifetimes trying to understand what it means to be human when humanity was taken from him." He glanced back at her. "You looked at me without flinching. You asked practical questions about the contract. You negotiated for your niece's welfare. You saw me as a man first. Perhaps I'm simply pragmatic, perhaps. Or perhaps you know what it's like to be defined by something beyond your control. To have people look at you and see only what they expect to see, never what you actually are." The words settled into Astrid like stones, into still water, sending ripples through her carefully maintained composure. She said nothing, but Halvard seemed to understand. He turned back to guiding the horse, and they travelled on in companionable silence. The landscape changed as they moved deeper into the wilderness. The settlements grew sparse, then disappeared entirely. Pine forests closed in around them, dark and deep, and the mountains rose ahead like the bones of the earth pushing through snow-covered skin. As the sun climbed higher, Halvard pulled the canvas cover over them, retreating into shadow. Astrid saw him wince as stray beams of light touched his skin, saw the way his jaw clenched against what must have been considerable pain. "How much further?" she asked. "We'll arrive by nightfall." His voice was strained. "There's a way station ahead where we can rest. I need to be out of the light for a few hours." The way station was little more than a crude shelter built into the side of a rock face. But it was dry and out of the wind. They stopped at the way station as the sun reached its zenith. Halvard moved stiffly, his skin pale even by his usual standards. Astrid noticed the way he kept to the deepest shadows, how his hands trembled slightly as he tended to the horse. "You should rest," she said, unpacking the provisions the village women had sent. "Dried fish, hard bread, a small wheel of cheese. I can keep watch." "Watch for what?" A wry smile touched his lips. "We're alone out here. The wolves won't bother us, and there are no bandits this far north in winter." "Then rest because you need it." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Wake me when the sun begins to set. We have another 3 hours of travel after that." Halvard settled into the far corner of the shelter, pulling his cloak around himself. Within moments he was utterly still. Not sleeping, Astrid realized, but something else. A kind of hibernation, perhaps, or simply the absolute stillness of something that no longer needed to breathe in the same way mortals did. She ate her meal slowly, letting her mind wander over the strangeness of her situation. 3 days ago, she'd been grinding barley in Bjorn's longhouse. Now she sat in a way station in the wilderness with a vampire who cast no shadow, traveling to a fate she couldn't predict. The oddest part was that she felt calmer than she had in years, as though some tension she hadn't known she was carrying had finally released its grip. When the sun began its descent, painting the snow in shades of amber and rose, Astrid touched Halvard's shoulder. He woke instantly, fully alert in a way that would have been impossible for a mortal. "Time to move," she said. They travelled on as darkness claimed the land. The horse seemed surer in the dark, and Halvard's entire demeanor changed. He sat straighter, moved with more grace, as though the night restored something the day leached away. "Tell me about your household," Astrid said. "What will my duties be?" "The hall is large. Too large for one person, really, but it's been in my keeping for a long time. You'll manage the stores, keep the fires lit, maintain order. I have no servants. It will be just the two of us, just us. For the entire winter. Does that trouble you?" Astrid considered. "I'm trying to understand what you need from me. You could manage a household yourself, I'd wager. You've lived long enough to master domestic tasks." "You're right. I could." Halvard's voice was quiet. "What I need, Astrid, is not someone to cook and clean. What I need is a witness, someone to prove that I still exist in a way that matters." "Do you understand?" She did, perhaps more than he knew. "Loneliness is its own kind of death." Yes, they crested a ridge, and Astrid's breath caught. Below them, nestled into the mountainside like a jewel in stone, stood Halvard's hall. It was larger than she'd expected, built of dark timber and stone, with windows that glowed with warm light, despite no smoke rising from any chimney. The architecture was old. She could see that even from a distance. Older than anything in Skarvik, perhaps older than the settlement. It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's been my sanctuary and my prison for longer than I care to remember," Halvard guided the horse down the slope toward the hall. "Welcome to your new home, Astrid. I hope you'll find it suits you." As they drew closer, Astrid noticed details that seemed impossible. The doors were carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift in the lamplight. The windows held glass, real glass, which was rare and precious. And there was warmth emanating from the building, a heat that seemed to come from the very stones themselves. Halvard helped her down from the sledge, his hands careful and impersonal. He produced a large iron key from within his cloak, ornate and old, decorated with wolf heads that gleamed in the moonlight. "This is for you," he said, pressing it into her palm. "The hall responds to this key. It will open any door, light any fire, provide what you need. Keep it safe." The metal felt warm against her skin, almost alive. Astrid closed her fingers around it, feeling the weight of responsibility and possibility in equal measure. Halvard opened the main doors, and they stepped inside. The great hall took her breath away. It was vast, with a high ceiling supported by carved pillars. Tapestries hung on the walls, depicting scenes from the old legends. A massive hearth stood at the center, fire blazing within, though no one had tended it. And everywhere, scattered throughout the space, were treasures. Books bound in leather, carved wooden chests, weapons that gleamed with careful maintenance, musical instruments she'd never seen before. "How long have you lived here?" Astrid asked, turning slowly to take it all in. "This particular hall?" "Perhaps 300 years. I built it myself, stone by stone." Halvard moved through the space with the ease of long familiarity. "Your chambers are this way." He led her down a corridor lined with more tapestries and carved doors. The one he opened revealed a room that made her stop in the doorway. It was larger than the entire sleeping area of Bjorn's longhouse. A bed stood against one wall, piled high with furs and woven blankets. A table and chair sat near a window. Chests lined the walls, and in the corner a smaller hearth held a fire that burned without any visible fuel. "I don't understand," Astrid said. "This is too fine for a housekeeper." "You're not a housekeeper. You're my guest. My companion. There's a difference." Halvard gestured to the chests. "I provided clothing in various sizes. I wasn't certain what would suit." "Take what you need, Halvard." She turned to face him. "What do you really want from me?" His pale eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw something raw and vulnerable beneath his careful composure. "Conversation," he said simply. "Someone to share the evening meal with, even if I cannot eat. Someone to discuss books and ideas with. Someone to remind me that I was human once and might be again." He paused. "And someone who will tell me honestly if I begin to lose myself to the hunger. Someone who will not simply fear me, but will see me clearly enough to know when I'm becoming the monster the stories claim I am." "That's a heavy burden to place on a stranger." "Yes, but you've carried heavy burdens before, I think. And you're still standing." Astrid looked around the beautiful chamber, thought of the hall beyond with its impossible warmth and endless treasures. She thought of Skarvik and its narrow expectations, of Bjorn's guilt-heavy eyes, of all the years she'd spent being invisible. "I'll need time to settle in," she said. "To understand this place and what you need from me, of course. Take all the time you require." Halvard moved toward the door. "I'll be in the library when you're ready. It's at the end of the main hall, through the door with the raven carved on it. Come find me when you're hungry. I'll show you where the stores are kept." He left, closing the door softly behind him. Astrid stood alone in the beautiful chamber, the iron key still warm in her hand. She moved to the window and looked out at the snow-covered mountains, at the vast darkness beyond. Somewhere out there was Skarvik, where she'd lived her entire life feeling too large. Too present, too much. Here, in this impossible hall with its vampire keeper, she felt for the first time that she might be exactly enough. Astrid spent the first hour exploring her chambers. The chests did indeed contain clothing, all well made, and in a variety of styles spanning what must have been decades or even centuries. Some pieces were clearly Norse, others from lands she'd only heard of in stories. She selected a simple wool dress in deep green, softer than anything she'd owned before, and changed out of her travel-worn clothes. The mirror hanging on the wall startled her. It was large, framed in gilt that had aged to a rich patinum. But when she looked into it, something seemed wrong. Her reflection appeared clearer, sharper than it should have been. Her face looked less tired, her eyes brighter. She touched her cheek, watched the reflection do the same, and felt a shiver of unease. Shaking off the strange feeling, she left her chambers and made her way through the hall. The fire in the central hearth burned steadily, casting dancing shadows on the carved pillars. She found the door with the raven carved into it and knocked softly. "Come," Halvard's voice called from within. The library was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined every wall, packed with books and scrolls. A large table dominated the center of the room, covered with open volumes and scattered papers. Halvard sat in a high-backed chair, a book open before him, but he looked up as she entered. "You found me?" he said, closing the book carefully. "Are you hungry?" "I could eat." He rose, moving with that fluid grace that seemed unnatural in someone so large. "The stores are well stocked. I'll show you where everything is kept." They walked together through corridors Astrid was already beginning to map in her mind. The hall was vast but not confusing. Each area seemed to have its own purpose, its own character. Helvard led her to a large room that served as both kitchen and pantry. "I have arrangements with traders," he explained. "They come once each season with supplies. In exchange, I provide them with furs and amber. They ask no questions, and I ensure they're well compensated for their discretion." The stores were indeed impressive. Barrels of grain, dried meats, preserved fruits, wheels of cheese wrapped in cloth. Enough to feed a household through a hard winter and beyond. "This is more than enough for one person," Astrid observed. "I may not eat, but I still remember what it was to be hungry. I've never been able to keep sparse stores. Some old habits refuse to die." A wry smile touched his lips. "Prepare whatever you'd like. Consider the hall and everything in it at your disposal." Over the next several days, they fell into a rhythm. Astrid woke with the dawn, though Halvard was already awake, having spent the night reading or working on some project she didn't yet understand. She would prepare her morning meal, then spend the day exploring the hall, tending to small tasks, learning the layout of her new home. But the evenings belonged to both of them. Each night, as darkness settled over the mountains, Halvard would find her, and they would sit together by the great hearth. He would ask her to speak while he listened, hungry for the sound of a human voice sharing human thoughts. So Astrid talked. She told him about Skarvik, about the rhythm of settlement life, about the children she'd helped raise and the small dramas that seemed so important within that confined world. And then, gradually, Halvard began to share his own stories. "I was born in the year 642, he said one evening, staring into the fire. "Well, that's my best calculation, based on the records I've been able to find. I was a third son, which meant I had no inheritance waiting for me. So I went raiding, like many young men of my time. I was good at it." "Too good?" Astrid sat quietly, giving him space to continue. "There was a settlement on the coast of what the Christians call Northumbria. We attacked it, took what we wanted. There was a woman there, a seeress, a Völva of considerable power. She begged me to spare the children. I refused. I was young and stupid and believed that mercy was weakness." His voice was flat, emotionless, but Astrid could hear the centuries of regret beneath it. "She cursed me, said I would walk the earth until I understood the value of a single life, until I learned what it meant to protect rather than destroy. She gave me immortality so I would have time to learn. She gave me hunger so I would never forget the violence I'd done. And she gave me isolation so I would understand what I'd taken from those children who would never grow old as I would never die." How long ago was this? Nearly 1,300 years. The number was incomprehensible. Astrid tried to imagine that span of time, all those years of solitude and hunger and regret. She failed. "Have you learned?" she asked softly. "What she wanted you to learn? I don't know. I've spent centuries trying. I've protected travelers, saved lives where I could, tried to balance the scales. But the hunger never leaves. There are nights when it's so strong I can barely think, when every heartbeat in the world sounds like a drum calling me to feed." He looked at her then. "There have been times I've failed, times I've taken too much, hurt people I meant to protect. Those names haunt me more than the ones from that first raid." Astrid thought of the chronicle she'd glimpsed in the library, the leather-bound book with names written in Halvard's careful hand, lost, fled, forgotten, each one a person who had passed through his life and left their mark on his conscience. "Why did you choose me?" she asked. "Of all the women you could have contracted with, why someone like me?" Halvard was quiet for a long moment. "Because when I saw you with your niece, I saw tenderness. When your brother spoke of you, I heard resilience. And when I met you, I saw someone who had survived being dismissed and diminished, yet still maintained her dignity. I need someone strong enough to weather my nature, wise enough to see me clearly, and compassionate enough to remind me why I keep trying. You're asking me to be your conscience. I'm asking you to be my witness, to see me at my best and my worst, and to tell me honestly which is which. Because after this many years, Astrid, I'm no longer certain I can trust my own judgment." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Astrid thought about what it must be like to live so long that you questioned your own morality, to carry centuries of mistakes with no way to forget them. "I'll try," she said finally, "but I can't promise to be what you need. I'm just a woman from a small settlement. I have no special wisdom. You have something more valuable. You have honesty. You have the clarity of someone who has nothing left to lose and therefore nothing to hide behind." He stood, stretched. "It's late. You should rest. What will you do?" "What I always do. Read, think, wait for dawn. Sleep is another thing the curse took from me." Astrid watched him leave the great hall, his footsteps silent on the stone floor. Then she looked into the fire, thinking about curses and redemption, about the strange path that had led her from Skarvik's rejection to this mountain hall with its impossible keeper. She touched her mother's brooch, the silver warm against her fingers. Her mother had told her she carried a gift, something heavy and important. Perhaps this was it. Not the ability to read runes or see the future, but the strength to bear witness to an immortal search for humanity. It seemed a strange destiny for a woman who'd been told she was too heavy to wed. But then she was learning that destiny rarely came in the shape you expected. Winter deepened around the hall, and with it, Astrid's understanding of her new home grew. She learned which corridors led to storage rooms filled with centuries of accumulated treasures, which doors opened onto small chambers where Halvard had lived through different eras of his long existence. She learned to read the subtle shifts in his demeanor that signaled when the hunger was growing strong, when he needed to retreat into solitude. But it was in the library that she spent most of her time. The books called to her in a way nothing in Skarvik ever had. Halvard taught her Latin and Greek with patient persistence, and she discovered she had an aptitude for languages that surprised them both. The old runes her mother had taught her seemed to unlock something in her mind, making the acquisition of new scripts easier than it should have been. One afternoon, while Halvard rested in his chambers away from the weak winter sun, Astrid was exploring a section of the library she hadn't examined before. The shelves here held older items, artifacts rather than books. Small carved figures, pieces of jewelry, stones marked with symbols she didn't recognize. Her hand was drawn to one object in particular. It was a small piece of bone carved with a single rune. Not Norse, but older. The moment her fingers touched it, the world tilted. Vision struck her like a physical blow. She was no longer in the library, but standing on a wind-swept cliff overlooking a grey sea. A woman stood before her, ancient and powerful, her eyes white with the sight. The Völva who had cursed Halvard. But Astrid was seeing through the Völva's eyes, feeling her thoughts, understanding her intentions in a way that went beyond mere observation. The young Viking warrior knelt before her, bloody and defiant even in defeat. Around them lay the bodies of children he had refused to spare. The Völva felt her rage, yes, but also something else, recognition. This brutal young man carried a spark of something she had seen only rarely in her long life. Potential, the capacity for profound change. If given enough time and the right circumstances, you will walk the earth until you understand. The Völva's voice came from Astrid's own throat, and she realized she was speaking the words aloud, reliving the moment. Until you learn what it means to cherish a single life as you should have cherished these. But there was more. The curse was not purely punishment. It was a test, yes, but also a gift wrapped in suffering. The immortality, the hunger, the isolation, all of it designed to strip away everything except the essential question: could a man built for destruction learn to create instead? Could violence transform into protection? And there was something else, something the Völva had woven into the curse's very fabric. A key, a way for it to be broken. Not through time or penance alone, but through connection. The curse would shatter when someone saw him completely, all his violence and all his striving, and chose him anyway. Not from fear or obligation, but from recognition of shared humanity. But the Völva had added one more element, one she had told no one. The person who could break the curse would not be ordinary. They would carry Velva blood themselves, whether they knew it or not. They would need power of their own to survive the breaking, to channel the magic that would be released. The vision shifted. Astrid saw her own mother, young and frightened, learning from her own grandmother that their family carried the Velva line. Saw her mother deliberately suppressing that power, choosing to blend into settlement life rather than embrace her heritage. Saw the cost of that suppression, the way the magic had nowhere to go, the way it had contributed to her early death. And then she saw herself. The weight that had settled on her after her mother's death was not simply grief-eating. It was unawakened magical power trying to manifest, trying to find form in a girl who had no training, no guidance, no understanding of what she carried. Her body had tried to ground the energy, to contain it, making her heavy and solid, because the magic had no other outlet. She was Velva-born, had always been. The gift her mother spoke of, the heaviness that had defined her life, the reason the runes came so easily to her. All of it made sudden, terrible sense. The vision released her, and Astrid fell to her knees in the library, gasping. The bone rune clattered to the floor beside her, and she stared at it with new understanding. This was the Velva's rune, the one she had given Halvard as a reminder of his curse. But it was also a key, a way for someone with the right bloodline to access the curse's true nature. Halvard had known, or at least suspected. That's why he had shown her the rune that first night, testing to see if she could read it. That's why he had chosen her specifically, a woman dismissed as unmarriageable from a small settlement. He had sensed what she was, even if she hadn't known it herself. Footsteps in the corridor. Halvard appeared in the doorway, his face pale even by his standards. He saw her on the floor, saw the bone rune, and his expression shifted through a dozen emotions too quickly to name. "You touched it," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "You knew." Astrid's voice shook. "You knew what I was, and you brought me here anyway, I suspected." "I wasn't certain." He moved into the room but kept his distance. "The Velva told me the curse could only be broken by someone who carried her blood, her gift. Over the centuries, I've met others who had traces of it, but none strong enough, none who could survive what breaking the curse would require. And you think I can? I think you're the strongest I've encountered. The magic in you, Astrid, it's been building your entire life with no release. That's why you carry the weight you do. It's power trying to manifest with nowhere to go." Astrid pushed herself to her feet, her legs unsteady. "So everything, the contract, bringing me here, the evening conversations, all of it was manipulation. You needed someone to break your curse, and I was convenient." "No," the word was sharp, almost desperate. "Yes, I hoped you might be the one. But I also saw someone who deserved better than the life Skarvik offered. Someone who was being crushed by a gift she didn't understand. I thought perhaps we could help each other." "Help each other?" Astrid laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're asking me to risk my life to free you from your curse. To awaken powers I've spent my whole life being afraid of. Powers that killed my mother. Your mother died because she tried to suppress what she was. You're already stronger than she was, simply by surviving this long with so much unawakened power." Halvard took a step closer. "I won't force you. I've never forced anyone. But you deserve to know the truth about yourself, regardless of what you decide to do with it." Astrid looked at the bone rune on the floor, at the centuries of books surrounding them, at Halvard with his pale eyes and his burden of time. She thought of her mother's cryptic warnings, of the weight she'd carried all her life, of the mirror that showed her stronger and brighter than she'd ever seen herself. "If I awaken this power, if I try to break your curse, what happens to me? I don't know. The Velva's magic is ancient and complex. You could emerge changed, transformed into your true form. You could die from the effort. You could succeed in breaking the curse and be left with your power fully awakened, for better or worse." His voice dropped. "Or you could choose to do nothing. Stay here through the winter as we agreed. Learn what you can, then leave in spring with enough silver to make your own way. I'll honor the contract regardless. But you hope I'll try. I hope you'll choose what's right for you. Not for me, not for anyone else. For you." He met her eyes. You've spent your whole life being what others needed you to be. Maybe it's time to discover what you want to be. Astrid bent and picked up the bone rune. It felt warm in her palm, almost alive. Power called to power, she realized. The Velva's magic recognizing its own descendant. Astrid didn't speak to Halvard for 3 days. She took her meals in her chambers, spent her time in parts of the hall where she knew he wouldn't be. She needed space to think, to process what she'd learned about herself and about the true nature of her presence here. On the 3rd night, she found herself standing before the large, gilt-framed mirror in the great hall. The one that showed no reflection of Halvard, but made her own image appear stronger, more vibrant. Now she understood why. The mirror was responding to her unawakened power, showing her not as she was, but as she could be. She studied her reflection, saw past the roundness she'd always been taught to see as a flaw, past the features she'd learned to hide. Looked instead at her eyes, dark and deep with an intelligence that had never been valued in Skarvik. At her hands, capable and strong. At the set of her shoulders, which had carried burdens without breaking. "You're Völva-born," she whispered to her reflection. "You always have been." The words felt like both revelation and homecoming. Behind her, Halvard's voice broke the silence. "I can leave if you'd prefer solitude." "No, stay." Astrid turned to face him. "I've been thinking about what you said, about choosing what's right for me." He waited, still and patient as stone. "My mother chose to suppress what she was. She wanted to be normal, to fit into the life she'd made with my father. And it killed her. The magic had nowhere to go, so it consumed her from within." Astrid touched her mother's brooch. "I don't want to make a mistake. But I also don't want to be used. I understand. Do you?" She moved closer to him. "You've lived 1,300 years, Halvard. You've accumulated wisdom and knowledge and power, but you're asking a woman of 24 winters, who only learned the truth about herself 3 days ago, to risk her life for your redemption. That's not partnership. That's desperation." "You're right." He didn't flinch from the accusation. "I am desperate, but I'm also sincere when I say I won't force you. If you choose to walk away, I'll accept it. And if I choose to try, what then? Then I teach you what I can, help you awaken your power safely, slowly. And when spring comes, when your strength is fully realized, we face the choice together." Astrid studied his face, looking for deception and finding only weary hope. "Why spring?" "Because that's when they'll come." The statement hung in the air between them. "Who will come?" Halvard moved to the hearth, stared into the flames. "Every few decades men come hunting for me, usually prompted by a priest who sees me as demonic, or a jarl whose pride I've offended in some way. I've learned to sense when such things are brewing, and this winter the signs have been growing stronger." "What signs?" "Travelers on paths that lead toward this hall. Questions asked in settlements about the man who lives in the mountains. Someone is gathering information, building a force. They'll come when the snows melt and travel becomes possible again." Astrid felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold. "And if I awaken my power, I could help defend against them." "If you awaken your power, you could do far more than defend. You could break the curse entirely, transform me from an immortal creature into a mortal man. And if I'm mortal, there's nothing for them to hunt." The logic was sound, but Astrid heard what he didn't say. "Except that breaking the curse might kill me in the process." "It might. I won't lie to you about that risk." She thought of Sigrid, of the promise she'd made to see her again in spring. She thought of Bjorn, guilt-heavy and desperate. She thought of all the years in Skarvik, being invisible, being dismissed, being told in 1,000 small ways that she didn't matter. "Teach me," she said, "not because I've decided to break your curse, but because I deserve to know what I am, what I'm capable of." Relief and something else, something that might have been joy, flickered across Halvard's face. "We start tomorrow night. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is." Over the following weeks, the hall transformed into a place of learning and discovery. Halvard was patient but demanding, pushing Astrid to understand the theoretical before attempting the practical. He brought out books written in languages that predated Norse. Texts that discuss the nature of Velva magic and how it differed from other traditions. Most magic is about imposing will on the world, he explained one evening. But Velva magic is about reading the threads of fate and knowing which ones to pull. It's more subtle, more dangerous in its way. Astrid absorbed everything, her mind hungry for knowledge after years of having her curiosity dismissed. She learned to meditate, to sense the currents of energy that flowed through all living things. She practiced with the runes, not just reading them, but understanding the power each one held. And slowly, carefully, she began to feel her own power stirring. It started as a warmth in her chest, spreading outward through her limbs. When she held the bone rune now, she could feel the Velva's presence, not as a vision, but as a gentle guidance, a grandmother's hand on her shoulder. With the awakening came physical changes. The heaviness that had defined her for so long began to shift. Not weight loss in the way the village would have recognized, but a transformation. She became more solid in some ways, more ethereal in others. When she looked in the mirror now, she saw someone who existed in two worlds simultaneously, physical and magical. "Your true form is emerging," Halvard observed one night. "How does it feel?" "Like I'm finally becoming who I was always meant to be." Astrid held up her hand, watched energy shimmer around her fingers. "But I'm also terrified. This power, it's so much more than I imagined. Fear is wisdom. It keeps you careful." A month into her training, Astrid woke in the deep of night to find Halvard standing in her doorway. She sat up, instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "I need to leave to hunt. The hunger is too strong, and I don't trust myself near you while you're awakening. Your blood sings to me in ways I can't ignore." She saw the tension in his frame, the way his hands clenched and unclenched. "How long will you be gone?" 2 days, maybe 3. There's a settlement half a day's journey south. I'll find what I need there and return." He met her eyes. "Lock your door. Don't leave the hall. And if I return and seem wrong in any way, use the iron key. It will seal this hall against me." After he left, Astrid lay awake, understanding for the first time how much control Halvard exercised every moment they were together. The curse made him hunger for her life, but his will kept that hunger in check. It was an exhausting balance, and she wondered how many times over the centuries he had failed to maintain it. She rose and went to the library, needing something to occupy her mind. The Chronicle of Names lay on Halvard's desk, and she opened it carefully. Page after page of names, each with a single word beside it, lost, fled, forgotten, and then near the back, a different word beside a name. Remembered Elena, 1847-1851, remembered. Astrid traced the entry with her finger, wondered what made this Elena different from all the others. What had she meant to Halvard that even after her time with him ended, she remained present in his memory in a way that brought comfort rather than pain? She wanted to be remembered, not lost or fled. She wanted her time in this hall to matter, to change both of them in ways that would resonate beyond the winter. The bone rune lay on the desk beside the chronicle. Astrid picked it up, felt its warmth, its welcome. The Velva's magic recognized her now, fully and completely. She was ready for the next step. Halvard returned on the 3rd day, gaunt but more controlled. He found Astrid in the library, practicing a simple rune casting. The stones glowed faintly as they fell, responding to her emerging power. "You've been progressing," he observed. "I had time to think while you were gone." She gathered the stones, met his eyes. "I want to try. To break the curse, not just for you, but for myself. I need to know what I'm truly capable of." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite hope, but close. "Are you certain?" "Once we begin, there's no turning back." "I'm certain." They spent the next weeks preparing. Halvard showed her texts that described curse-breaking rituals, explained the dangers they would face. The magic bound in his curse had accumulated power over 13 centuries. Releasing it would be like trying to contain a flood with bare hands. The Velva designed it so that only her bloodline could survive the breaking, Halvard explained. Your power will need to channel the curse, purify it, release it safely. If your strength falters, the magic could consume you. Then we make sure my strength doesn't falter. Spring came early that year. The snow began to melt, water trickling down from the peaks. And with the thaw came the hunters, just as Halvard had predicted. They arrived at dawn, 40 men led by a grey-bearded jarl and a priest in black robes. Astrid watched from the hall's windows as they surrounded the building, their weapons gleaming in the pale morning light. "Jarl Magnus," Halvard said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "His daughter was here once, 10 years ago. She fled after 3 months, claimed I was holding her prisoner. The truth was more complicated. What was the truth? She was fleeing her father. He beat her, used her as currency in his political schemes. I offered her sanctuary. When she was strong enough, I helped her escape to a settlement where she could start over. But Magnus believes I corrupted her, stole her from him." The priest's voice rang out across the snowy clearing. "Halvard, creature of darkness, we've come to free the woman you've enslaved and send you back to whatever hell spawned you." Astrid felt her power surge, responding to the threat. The bone rune in her pocket grew hot. "What do we do?" "You stay inside. I'll talk to them, try to make them understand you're here by choice." "No." Astrid's voice was firm. "I'm not hiding. I'm not a victim to be rescued. And I'm tired of men deciding what's best for me without asking." Before Halvard could stop her, she walked to the great doors and pushed them open. The morning air was crisp, touched with the promise of true spring. She stepped outside, and 40 pairs of eyes turned to her. She was radiant, she knew. The weeks of training had transformed her completely. She stood taller, moved with grace she'd never possessed in Skarvik. Her dark hair flowed loose around her shoulders, and power shimmered in the air around her like heat waves. Jarl Magnus stared. "Who are you?" "I'm Astrid Ragnardottir, daughter of Völvaline, keeper of this hall by my own choice." "You are trespassing." The priest stepped forward, clutching a wooden cross. "You've been bewitched, girl. We've come to save you from this demon. Father Orm, I appreciate your concern, but I am not bewitched. I'm awakened." She raised her hand, and the air around her crackled with visible energy. "I am what my mother was, and her mother before her. I am Völva, and this is my choice." Magnus's face darkened. "My daughter said the same thing. He has some trick, some way of making women believe they want to stay. But I won't lose another to his evil. Your daughter is alive and well in a settlement 3 days north of here," Astrid said, her voice carrying across the clearing. "She's married to a good man. She has 2 children. And she's happy, Magnus. Happier than she ever was under your roof." "Lies." But there was uncertainty in his eyes now. Astrid closed her eyes, reached out with her newly awakened power. The Völva gift allowed her to read the threads of fate, to see what was and what had been. She found Magnus's daughter in those threads, found the truth of her life. She named her first child Astrid, she said softly, after her grandmother. "She thinks of you sometimes, Magnus, and she mourns the father you could have been. But she doesn't regret leaving." The Jarl's face crumpled. Halvard emerged from the hall, moving to stand beside Astrid. "I didn't steal your daughter, Magnus. I saved her from you. And if you attack this hall, you'll have to go through Astrid first. A Völva in her full power. Do you really want to test yourself against that?" For a long moment no one moved. Then Father Orm raised his cross higher. "She's an abomination. Both of them are. God commands us to purge such evil from the earth." He began chanting in Latin, an exorcism ritual. The words held power of their own, a different kind of magic than what Astrid wielded. She felt it pressing against her, trying to force her back, to name her as something unholy. "No." The word came from deep within her, from the place where her power resided. "Your God is young, priest. My magic is old, older than your prayers, older than your cross. It comes from the earth itself, and it will not be bound by your fear." The sword of starlight manifested in her hand. Not a physical weapon, but pure, condensed magic, forged from her Völva heritage and her own determination. It blazed with light that made the men shield their eyes. Halvard stared at the sword, then at her. "Astrid, what are you doing? What needs to be done? She raised the sword, felt its weight and purpose. The curse ends now. Whether they attack or not, I won't let you carry this burden any longer. She turned to him, saw the centuries of pain in his pale eyes. Kneel. If you fail, it will kill you. Then don't let me fail. Help me channel it. Trust me the way you've asked me to trust you. Halvard knelt slowly, his head bowed. Astrid placed the tip of the sword of starlight against his chest, where a mortal heart would beat. She reached with her other hand for the bone rune in her pocket, felt the Völva's presence surge to meet her. The curse fought back. 1,300 years of accumulated magic roared through her, trying to overwhelm her nascent power. She saw flashes of every life Halvard had lived, every person he'd hurt, every attempt at redemption that had fallen short. The weight of it tried to drag her down, to drown her in his long history of failure and regret, but she also saw the moments of beauty, the lives he'd saved, the kindness he'd shown, the way he'd spent centuries trying to become worthy of forgiveness he might never receive. "You are not your worst moment," she gasped, channeling the curse through the sword, through herself, through the bone rune that connected her to the Völva's original spell. "You are every moment you chose to try again." The curse began to break, not shattering but unwinding, strand by strand. The magic that had bound Halvard for so long flowed through Astrid like lightning, like fire, like ice. It burned and froze and tore at her, but she held firm. The Völva blood in her veins sang in recognition, accepting the returned magic, transforming it from curse to pure power. Magnus and his men watched in stunned silence as the hall blazed with light. Father Orm's chanting faltered and stopped. The priest dropped to his knees, not in prayer but in awe. Halvard collapsed forward and Astrid caught him. The sword dissipated, its purpose fulfilled. She felt the curse leave him completely, felt his heart begin to beat for the first time in over a millennium. He drew a breath, a real breath, and his eyes, when they opened, were no longer colorless but a warm grey blue. "You did it," he whispered, "but the cost was immediate and severe." Astrid's legs buckled. The magic she'd channeled had transformed her, yes, but it had also burned through her mortal limitations. She was simultaneously more and less than she had been. Stronger in some ways, changed irrevocably in others. Magnus caught her as she fell. The old Jarl, his anger forgotten, held her gently. "What have you done, girl?" "Broken a curse," she managed. "Freed a good man. Become what I was always meant to be." The world dimmed around the edges. She heard Halvard calling her name, felt his now mortal hands cradling her face. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was his face, transformed by freedom and fear in equal measure. Astrid woke 3 days later in her chamber, sunlight streaming through the windows. Real sunlight, warm and golden, not the pale winter light she'd grown accustomed to. She tried to sit up and found Halvard sleeping in the chair beside her bed, his head resting on his arms near her hand. He looked different in true sleep. Younger somehow, despite the lines that centuries of strain had etched around his eyes. His chest rose and fell with steady mortal breath. She touched his hair, marveling at the warmth of him. He woke instantly, those blue-grey eyes finding hers. "You're awake. Thank the gods, you're awake. How long?" 3 days. Magnus and his men have been camped outside, waiting. Father Orm has been praying over you, though I don't think his prayers did much. A smile touched his lips. "Your power is too old for his young god to touch." Astrid sat up carefully. Her body felt strange, lighter yet more solid at the same time. "What happened to me?" "You absorbed part of the curse's magic when you broke it. The Völva designed it that way, I think. A safeguard to ensure her descendant would survive the breaking. You're changed, Astrid. You'll live far longer than a normal human span now. Centuries, perhaps. The weight of that settled over her. And you? Mortal. Completely and entirely mortal. I'll age now, die eventually. I have perhaps 40 or 50 good years, if I'm fortunate." He took her hand. "I'll outlive you in the short term, but you'll outlive me in the end. The irony isn't lost on me. Is it worth it? Being mortal again? Ask me in 50 years. But his smile said everything. He was free. The hunger was gone, the isolation broken. Whatever years he had left would be truly his own. There was a knock at the door. Magnus entered, his expression uncertain. "The girl is awake?" "I am," Astrid said. "And I'm not a girl. I'm a woman grown and vulva besides." "You do well to remember that." Magnus actually smiled. "My daughter said much the same to me once. I'm beginning to understand I should have listened." He held out a letter. "This came for you. A trader brought it from Skarvik 3 days ago, right after we arrived." Astrid took the letter, recognizing Bjorn's careful script. She read it quickly, her heart clenching. "It's Sigrid," she said quietly. "She's been ill, fevered and weak. Bjorn is asking me to come home." Halvard's hand tightened on hers. "You should go. Your family needs you. Will you come with me?" "To Skarvik?" "They won't exactly welcome me with open arms. They'll welcome a vulva with the power to heal a sick child. And they'll accept the man who stands beside her, or they'll answer to me." Astrid stood, finding her legs steady despite days of unconsciousness. "Besides, I made a promise to see Sigrid again. I keep my promises." They travelled south with Magnus and his men, an unlikely company bound by shared experience. Father Orm rode in silence, his certainty shaken by what he'd witnessed. Magic older than his faith, power that defied his understanding of good and evil. On the second night of travel, he approached Astrid where she sat by the fire. "I don't understand what you are," he admitted. "My teachings say your power is demonic, but I watched you save a man's soul, not damn it. I watched you offer mercy when you could have destroyed us all. Magic is neither good nor evil, Father. It simply is. What matters is the hand that wields it and the heart that guides that hand." Astrid stirred the fire with a stick. "Your god is young, but perhaps he's wise enough to understand that." They reached Skarvik on the 4th day. The settlement looked smaller than Astrid remembered, more fragile. News of their approach had preceded them, and people gathered in the square, staring at the woman who had left as unmarriageable and returned as vulva. Bjorn pushed through the crowd, his face haggard. "Astrid, thank the gods. Sigrid keeps asking for you. She's getting worse. Take me to her." The child lay in the sleeping chamber, her face flushed with fever, her breathing shallow. Astrid knelt beside her, placed her hand on Sigrid's forehead. Her power, still new and sometimes unwieldy, reached into the girl's body and found the sickness. A fever of the lungs, dangerous but not beyond healing. She sang one of the old songs her mother had taught her, the ones that carried power in their words. The vulva magic flowed through her hands into Sigrid, cooling the fever, strengthening the child's weakened body. It took an hour, maybe more, but gradually Sigrid's breathing eased. The flush faded from her cheeks. The child's eyes opened, focusing on Astrid. "You came back, I promised, didn't I?" Astrid brushed hair from Sigrid's forehead. "And I keep my promises. You look different, like starlight. I am different. And when you're stronger, I'm going to teach you everything I know, if you want to learn." Sigrid's smile was gap-toothed and beautiful. "I want to learn." Later, standing outside Bjorn's longhouse with Halvard beside her, Astrid looked out over Skarvik. The village that had rejected her, that had made her feel invisible and worthless. It seemed almost pitiable now, this small place with its smaller understanding of what made a life valuable. "Will you stay?" Bjorn asked, coming to stand beside them. "I know I have no right to ask, but Sigrid needs a teacher, and I need to make amends." "We'll stay through summer," Astrid decided, "long enough to train Sigrid to ensure she understands her gift. But this isn't our home anymore. Where will you go?" Astrid looked at Halvard, saw her future reflected in his mortal eyes. "We'll build something new, a place for people like us, people who don't fit the molds their villages try to force them into. Velvaborn who need teaching, those rejected for being different. We'll create a sanctuary," Halvard smiled. "That sounds like a good use of the centuries you have ahead of you." "The decades we have together," she corrected. "Those are what matter." That evening she stood before the large mirror in what had been her sleeping chamber. Her reflection looked back at her, radiant and powerful and completely herself. Not too heavy, not too soft, not unmarriageable. Simply Astrid, Völva and Cursebreaker, woman who had discovered her worth in the mountains and brought it home like a torch to light the darkness. She thought of the chronicle of names waiting in Halvard's library, now in a hall that belonged to both of them. She would add her own book beside it, she decided. Not a chronicle of those lost or fled, but a record of those who found themselves. Those who discovered that the weight they carried was not burden, but destiny. Not shame, but power waiting to be claimed. The first entry would be her own story, written in her hand with Halvard's illustrations. And there would be others. Sigrid would have a page. The women who came to their sanctuary would have pages. Each life that touched theirs would be remembered, honored, celebrated. She was never too heavy to wed. She was carrying the weight of magic, of possibility, of a future she would build with her own hands and her own choices. And that future started now, in this small settlement that no longer had the power to define her. Some love stories don't begin with a choice, but the ones that matter are defined by the choices that follow. And Astrid chose herself first, then chose to share that self with someone who had spent lifetimes learning to be worthy of such a gift. Together they would write new stories, break new curses, and prove that redemption was always possible for those brave enough to seek it. Summer in Skarvik brought long days and the constant bustle of preparation for the harvest season. Astrid spent her mornings with Sigrid, teaching the girl the fundamentals of Völva magic. They would sit together in the meadow beyond the settlement, away from curious eyes and fearful whispers. "Feel the earth beneath you," Astrid instructed, her hand resting on Sigrid's small shoulder. "It's alive, Sigrid. Everything is alive and connected. That's what makes Völva magic different from other kinds. We don't impose our will. We listen, then ask." The girl closed her eyes, her face scrunched in concentration. After a moment, her eyes flew open. "I felt it, like a heartbeat, but bigger, slower. That's the pulse of the land itself. You're Völva-born, little one. Your gift is strong." Halvard watched from a distance, leaning against an old oak tree. He'd taken to spending his days outdoors, soaking in the sunlight he'd been denied for over a millennium. His skin had begun to tan, something that still seemed to surprise him. He was learning to be human again, one small revelation at a time. The village had been slow to accept him. They knew the stories, remembered the fear. But over the weeks, they'd watched him help with repairs on the boat shed, seen him carry water for the elderly, noticed the way he looked at Astrid with unmistakable devotion. Fear gradually gave way to wary tolerance, then to something approaching acceptance. Magnus had stayed for a fortnight before returning to his own lands. Before leaving, he'd pulled Astrid aside. "My daughter wants to meet you," he'd said gruffly. "She heard what you did, breaking the curse. She says anyone with that kind of power and courage deserves her gratitude." He paused. "And mine. You gave me back my daughter in a way. Helped me understand what I'd driven her from. Will you visit her?" "I plan to, and I'll apologize, though I doubt words can heal all the damage I've done." Magnus had handed her a small pouch of silver. "For the child's training. Every Völva needs proper tools." Father Orm had departed as well, but not before spending 3 evenings in deep conversation with Astrid about the nature of magic and faith. The priest's certainty had been shaken, but perhaps that was for the best. Certainty without understanding bred fear, and fear bred cruelty. As the weeks passed, Astrid noticed changes in herself beyond the obvious ones. Her senses had sharpened. She could hear conversations from across the settlement, smell rain coming days before it fell, taste the subtle differences in the energy that flowed through different places. The power she'd absorbed from breaking the curse continued to integrate with her own Völva gift, creating something new and strange. One evening, as she and Halvard walked along the fjord's edge, she voiced a concern that had been growing. "I'm starting to understand what my mother must have felt," she said quietly. "The weight of this power, the responsibility, knowing you could help, but also knowing you could harm if you're not careful. Is that why she tried to suppress it?" "I think so. She wanted a simple life, a husband, children, a place in the community. Magic complicated that, made her different, made her frightening to some." Astrid skipped a stone across the water. But suppression killed her. The power had nowhere to go. Halvard was quiet for a moment. You're not planning to suppress yours. No, but I am planning to use it wisely. That's why building the sanctuary matters. Others like me, like Sigrid, they need a place where their gifts are celebrated, not feared. Where they can learn control and purpose. We'll build it together. I have centuries of architectural knowledge gathering dust in my memory. He smiled. And now I have the time to use it properly, without the curse eating away at me. They'd found land, a valley 2 days north of Skarvik. It was remote but accessible, with good water and rich soil. Halvard had purchased it with the amber and furs he'd accumulated over the years. They would begin construction in the autumn, after the harvest, when farmers could spare time to help with the building in exchange for silver. Bjorn had been the first to volunteer. His guilt over bartering Astrid away had transformed into fierce protectiveness. He couldn't undo what he'd done, but he could help build something better. You'll need a healer at this sanctuary, he'd said one evening. Someone who knows herbs and basic healing. I've been learning from old Bergthora. I could be useful. Astrid had studied her brother. Saw the sincerity there, the desire to make amends. What about your farm? The boys are old enough to manage it, and Sigrid will be going with you anyway. I'd rather be near her, help with what you're building, than stay here farming land that only reminds me of my failures. So Bjorn would join them, and Bergthora, surprisingly, had expressed interest as well. The old woman had vulva blood herself, though she'd never developed the gift. She wanted to see what a proper vulva sanctuary looked like, wanted to contribute what knowledge she had. Others would come too, Astrid sensed. The rejected, the different, the powerful, who had learned to hide their light. They would build something unprecedented, not a settlement bound by the old rules, but a community founded on acceptance and growth. Sigrid progressed quickly in her training. By midsummer, she could light fires with a thought, sense the health of plants and animals, read simple runes with accuracy. The child had a natural gift that reminded Astrid of her own mother, though Sigrid's power manifested differently. Where Astrid's magic was earth and strength, Sigrid's was air and intuition. You'll be stronger than me one day, Astrid told her after a particularly impressive display of rune reading. Will you be jealous? Sigrid asked with a child's directness. I'll be proud. That's what teachers should feel when their students surpass them. One night, lying beside Halvard in the small sleeping chamber they now shared, Astrid spoke of her fears. What if I'm not strong enough? What if I can't build this sanctuary properly? Can't teach these people what they need to know? Halvard turned to face her, his mortal eyes warm in the candlelight. You broke a 1,300-year-old curse, Astrid. You faced down armed men, and a priest convinced you were evil. You transformed yourself from invisible to undeniable. I think you can manage building a sanctuary. You have more faith in me than I have in myself. Then borrow mine until yours catches up. He kissed her forehead. You saved me. Let me return the favor by believing in you when you can't. She held him close. This man who had walked through centuries to find redemption, who had chosen mortality over immortal loneliness. They had perhaps 40 good years together, if fortune favored them. 40 years against the centuries she would live beyond him. It would have to be enough. The first sign of trouble came with the autumn rains. A messenger arrived from the south, mud-splattered and exhausted, bearing news that made Astrid's blood run cold. Father Orm had returned to his monastery and reported what he'd witnessed. The church was now aware that a vulva of considerable power lived in the north, and they were not pleased. They're calling it heresy, the messenger said, accepting the ale Bjorn offered. Claiming you're using demonic powers to bewitch good Christian folk. The bishop himself has taken an interest. Halvard's jaw tightened. How long do we have? They won't send anyone until spring. The passes are already closing with early snow, but when the thaw comes, expect a delegation, a large one. After the messenger left, Astrid stood at the longhouse door, staring out at the rain. She felt Halvard come up behind her, his presence solid and comforting. We could run, he said quietly. Take Sigrid and disappear into the wilderness. I know places where they'd never find us, and abandon everyone else who needs what we're trying to build. No, Astrid turned to face him. Running doesn't solve anything. It just postpones the confrontation. Besides, I'm tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of apologizing for existing. They'll bring soldiers. Holy warriors convinced they're doing God's work. Then we'll show them that the old magic and their new faith can coexist. Or we'll show them why it's unwise to threaten a Völva on her own land. She touched his cheek. Either way, we face it together. The following weeks were spent in preparation. Not for war, but for the kind of demonstration that might change minds. Astrid worked with Sigrid and Bergthora, creating a detailed record of what Völva magic could accomplish. Healing the sick, blessing crops, predicting weather patterns, Findi. Lost children, nothing demonic, everything practical and helpful. They need to see that we're not their enemy, Astrid explained to the growing group of supporters that gathered each evening. That what we do serves the community, strengthens it. Fear comes from ignorance. We fight it with knowledge, but knowledge alone might not be enough. Eldvard spent his days teaching the younger men defensive techniques, not how to kill, but how to protect. How to stand firm, how to de-escalate violence, how to create barriers without attacking. I've spent lifetimes learning that violence only breeds more violence, he told them. Your strength lies in unity and clear purpose, not in the sharpness of your blades. Winter came hard and fast that year, sealing them in earlier than expected. The valley where they planned to build the sanctuary was completely inaccessible, buried under snow that wouldn't melt until late spring. So they adapted, using Bjorn's longhouse and the surrounding buildings as a makeshift training ground. More people arrived, refugees from other settlements. A young man who could speak with animals but had been exiled for witchcraft. Twin sisters, whose touch could mend broken bones, but who'd been branded as cursed. An old skald, whose songs held power that frightened the Christian converts in his village. Each came with their own story of rejection, their own need for sanctuary. Astrid welcomed them all, taught them what she knew, learned from what they could teach her. The community grew organically, bound not by fear or obligation, but by shared understanding and mutual support. Sigrid thrived in this environment. The girl, who had been devastated by Astrid's departure from Skarvik, now had a dozen teachers, each with their own gifts to share. She learned animal speech from the exiled young man, healing touch from the twins, power songs from the old skald. And from Astrid, she learned the fundamental truth that would guide her entire life. Power without compassion was just another form of violence. One snowy evening, as the community gathered for the evening meal, Ulvard pulled Astrid aside. I've been thinking about what's coming, he said. About the church delegation. They'll expect us to fight or flee. Both reactions would confirm their beliefs about us being dangerous. What are you suggesting? Invitation. We invite them to stay with us, to see how we live, what we do, who we help. Show them we're not a threat but a resource. Let them witness Völva magic in action, healing and helping. Astrid considered this. It was risky. Allowing potential enemies into their midst could be disastrous. But it was also brilliant. How could they maintain their fear and hatred while breaking bread with those they'd been taught to despise? It could work, she said slowly. Or it could get us all killed. Most worthwhile things carry that risk, Halvard smiled. Besides, you have something they'll never expect. You have truth on your side. And truth, given time and space, has a way of being undeniable. They spent the winter months preparing, documenting every healing, every act of service, every moment where Völva magic improved lives rather than destroying them. Bergthora, who could read and write, kept meticulous records. The twins sketched illustrations. The old skald composed songs that told the stories of each person in their growing community. By the time the spring thaw began, they had compiled a comprehensive record, not a defense but a testament, evidence of what Völva magic could be when wielded with wisdom and compassion. Sigrid, now 8 years old and powerful beyond her years, stood beside Astrid one morning watching the ice break on the fjord. Are you scared? The girl asked. Terrified, Astrid admitted. But fear and courage aren't opposites. Courage is what you do despite the fear. Mama Inga used to say that. Sigrid slipped her small hand into Astrid's. Before she died, she was a wise woman. I wish I'd known her better. She would have liked you. She always said the strongest people are the ones who choose kindness when they could choose cruelty. Sigrid looked up at her. That's you, Aunt Astrid. You're the strongest person I know. Astrid squeezed the girl's hand, emotion thick in her throat. This was why the sanctuary mattered. Not for the grand gesture or the political statement, but for children like Sigrid, who needed to grow up believing that their gifts were blessings, not curses. That strength and gentleness could coexist. That being different didn't mean being wrong. The messenger came again with the spring melt. The church delegation would arrive within a month. 20 people, led by Bishop Adalbert himself, a man known for his zeal and his unwavering conviction in the righteousness of the church's mission. He's not known for his flexibility of thought, the messenger warned. He sees the world in absolutes, God's law or heresy. There's no middle ground with him. Then we'll have to show him that middle ground exists, whether he acknowledges it or not, Astrid replied. She called her community together that evening. Nearly 40 people now, from children to elders, each with their own gifts and stories. They're coming to judge us, she told them, to decide if we deserve to exist. But we know our worth. We know what we've built here isn't evil or demonic, but human. Flawed and struggling and beautiful in its imperfection. So we'll show them who we are, not what they expect. And we'll do it with open hands and honest hearts. Around the room, heads nodded. Fear flickered in some eyes, but determination burned brighter. They had found something precious here, something worth defending. Not with violence, but with the undeniable proof of their existence and their value. The stage was set. The players were ready, and when Bishop Adalbert arrived with his delegation and his certainty, he would find something he'd never encountered before. A Völva who refused to be afraid, a community that stood united, and truth that couldn't be dismissed or destroyed. Bishop Adalbert arrived on a morning when the sky was threatening rain. His delegation rode in formation, 20 strong as promised, with the bishop at the center on a white horse that seemed impossibly clean given the muddy roads. He was younger than Astrid expected, perhaps 40, with sharp features and eyes that assessed everything they touched. Astrid stood at the edge of the settlement to greet them, Halvard on her right, Sigrid on her left. Behind them, the entire community had gathered, not in defiance but in welcome. They'd laid out tables with food and drink, prepared sleeping quarters, created an atmosphere of hospitality rather than hostility. Bishop Adalbert, Astrid said, stepping forward with her head high. Welcome to our community. We're honored by your visit and hope you'll accept our hospitality during your stay. The bishop dismounted, his movements precise and deliberate. He studied Astrid with an intensity that would have made her uncomfortable a year ago. Now she simply returned his gaze with calm certainty. You are the one they call Völva, he said. Not a question, but a statement. I am Astrid Ragnardottir, daughter of the Völva line, yes. And this is my companion, Halvard, and my student, Sigrid. A child? The bishop's eyes moved to Sigrid. You corrupt the young with your practices. I teach the young to use their gifts wisely and well, Astrid corrected gently. As any teacher does. We have documentation of our work, if you'd care to see it. Healings, weather predictions, assistance to travelers. Nothing that contradicts your teachings, only supplements them. One of the bishop's companions, a younger priest with kind eyes, leaned forward. You claim your magic serves God's purpose? I claim our gifts serve the community. Whether that serves God's purpose is for him to judge, not me. Astrid gestured to the prepared tables. But these are discussions best had after you've rested from your journey. Please eat, refresh yourselves. We're not your enemies, Bishop. We're simply people trying to live in peace. The delegation exchanged glances. They clearly expected defiance, perhaps violence. Hospitality seemed to confuse them. Bishop Adalbert's expression remained stern, but he nodded. We will accept your hospitality. But make no mistake, this is an investigation, not a social call. We're here to determine whether your practices pose a threat to the faithful. We understand, and we welcome your scrutiny." Astrid stepped aside, allowing them to enter the settlement proper. So for the following days, a strange dance unfolded. The bishop and his delegation observed everything, from morning prayers to healing sessions to Sigrid's lessons. They watched as the twins mended a broken arm with their touch, as the young man who spoke with animals helped locate a lost sheep, as the old skald sang songs that eased the pain of a woman in labor. Bergthora presented them with the records she'd kept, page after page of documented cases where Velva magic had served the community. The young priest, whose name was Brother Clement, spent hours reading through them, his expression growing increasingly thoughtful. "I don't understand," he admitted to Astrid one evening. "Everything I was taught said magic comes from the adversary, that it corrupts those who use it. But what I've seen here is healing and helping. Perhaps what you were taught was too simple," Astrid suggested. "The world isn't divided neatly into God's work and the adversary's work. There are forces that existed before your faith that will exist after it. Velva magic is one of them. It's not evil or holy. It simply is. What matters is the intention behind it." Brother Clement looked troubled but intrigued. He wasn't the only one. Several members of the delegation had begun asking questions, engaging in real conversations rather than interrogations. They ate with the community, shared stories, saw that the people they'd been sent to judge were not monsters, but humans struggling with the same problems everyone faced. Bishop Adalbert, however, remained unmoved. Astrid watched him observe everything with that same sharp assessment, his expression never softening. On the fourth evening, he requested a private meeting with her. They sat in Bjorn's longhouse, the fire crackling between them. Hilvard had wanted to attend, but Astrid had asked him to wait outside. This conversation needed to be between her and the bishop alone. "You're very clever," Adalbert said without preamble. "This whole performance. The hospitality, the documentation, the carefully chosen demonstrations. You're trying to manipulate us. I'm trying to show you the truth," Astrid replied calmly. "Nothing you've seen has been staged or false. This is how we live. This is what we do. You came expecting monsters, and you found people. That's not manipulation. That's reality. You twist scripture to justify your practices. I don't touch scripture at all. What I do predates your church by centuries. My ancestors were practicing this magic when your Christ was still being born. It's not a rejection of your faith. It simply exists alongside it," the bishop leaned forward. "That's what makes you dangerous. You offer people an alternative, a way to access power without submission to God's will. You're a temptation, a false prophet leading sheep astray." "I'm a woman who discovered her gifts and chose to use them to help others," Astrid said, her patience beginning to fray. "If that threatens your church, perhaps you should ask yourself why. Is it because what I do is truly evil, or because it demonstrates that your institution doesn't have a monopoly on truth and power?" Silence stretched between them. The bishop's jaw worked, and Astrid could see the internal struggle. He was intelligent enough to recognize the logic of her argument, but his entire worldview was built on the premise she challenged. "You healed a sick child," he said finally. "Brother Clement told me about it. The farmer's daughter, who was dying of fever. Your student Sigrid healed her. Yes, is that evil in your eyes? Saving a child's life? It depends on the source of the power. If it comes from darkness, then even good deeds serve a greater evil." Astrid stood, her patience finally exhausted. "Then we have nothing more to discuss. You've already decided we're evil regardless of evidence? You see what you want to see, believe what you want to believe. I'd hoped for dialogue, for understanding. But you're not interested in either. I'm interested in protecting the faithful from corruption, and I'm interested in protecting gifted children from being burned as witches," Astrid shot back, "in giving them a place where their abilities are celebrated rather than feared, in building a world where power and compassion coexist. If that makes me dangerous in your eyes, so be it." She turned to leave, but the bishop's voice stopped her. "What if I could offer you something? an arrangement that would allow you to practice your magic under the church's supervision. You would convert, accept Christ, and use your gifts in service to the faithful. No persecution, no threats, just cooperation. Astrid looked back at him. You're asking me to surrender my heritage, my beliefs, my autonomy in exchange for permission to exist. That's not cooperation, Bishop. That's capitulation. It's survival. Without the church's protection, you'll face constant persecution. Zealots will hunt you. Villages will turn against you. But under our auspices, you could thrive as a prisoner. A trained dog performing tricks for your approval. Astrid shook her head. I've spent my entire life being told I needed to change, to shrink, to become acceptable to others. I'm done with that. I'll stand as I am or I'll fall as I am. But I won't pretend to be something I'm not for anyone's comfort. The bishop stood as well, and for a moment something like respect flickered in his eyes. You're making a mistake, one that could cost you everything, perhaps. Or perhaps I'm finally making the right choice. Astrid moved to the door. You and your delegation are welcome to stay as long as you like. Observe us, judge us, report back to your superiors. But we won't change who we are to suit your expectations. We'll continue to heal, to teach, to build. And if that threatens your church, then your church's foundations aren't as solid as you believe. She left him sitting by the fire. His certainty finally cracked, if not broken. The next morning brought unexpected developments. Brother Clement approached Astrid as she was working in the herb garden with Bergthora, teaching the old woman which plants responded best to vulva encouragement. "May I speak with you?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. Astrid studied him. The young priest's face was troubled, conflicted in a way that spoke of long nights wrestling with conscience. She gestured to a bench near the garden's edge. "What's on your mind, brother?" He sat, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Everything I've observed here contradicts what I was taught in the monastery. I was told that all magic is demonic, that those who practice it are in league with darkness. But I've watched your community for days now. I've seen kindness, generosity, healing, children being taught with patience, the sick being tended with care. Where is the darkness in that?" "There isn't any," Astrid said simply. "That's what I've been trying to show the bishop. He sees what he wants to see, what he needs to see to maintain his certainty." Clement looked at her. "But I can't unsee what I've witnessed. The girl with the broken arm, who would have been crippled without the twins' healing. The lost child found because your student could speak with birds. The woman in labor whose pain was eased by ancient songs. These are miracles, aren't they? Just not the kind sanctioned by the church. I don't call them miracles. I call them skills, gifts, natural abilities that some are born with and others aren't. Like some can sing beautifully while others are tone deaf. It's not supernatural. It's simply natural in ways your church doesn't understand." Brother Clement was quiet for a moment. "There are others in the delegation who feel as I do. We've been talking late at night when the bishop retires. We're not all convinced that you're the threat he believes you to be. And what will you do with those doubts? I don't know yet, but I wanted you to know that not all of us are your enemies." He stood, then hesitated. "May I ask you something personal?" "You may ask. Whether I answer depends on the question. The man you're with, Halvard. The stories say he was cursed, that he was a vampire who fed on human blood. Is it true?" Astrid considered how much to reveal. "It's true. He was cursed 1,300 years ago for violence he committed. The curse made him immortal, made him hunger for blood, isolated him from humanity. I broke that curse, and now he's mortal again. Why do you ask? Because redemption is at the heart of my faith. The idea that no one is beyond saving, that even the worst sinner can find forgiveness and transformation. If what you say is true, then you've accomplished something the church claims only God can do. You've redeemed a soul. I didn't redeem him. He redeemed himself through 13 centuries of struggle and trying. I simply released him from the punishment he'd already served." Brother Clement smiled slightly. "That sounds like grace to me. Perhaps a different kind than I was taught, but grace nonetheless." After he left, Bergthora chuckled. "That young man is going to have a crisis of faith before this is over, or perhaps he'll find a deeper faith. one that's strong enough to hold complexity rather than demanding simplicity. The day continued, with various members of the delegation approaching different community members. Some remained skeptical and distant, but others genuinely engaged. They shared meals, asked questions, listened to stories. The rigid walls the bishop had tried to maintain were crumbling despite his best efforts. That evening, disaster struck. A child from a neighboring farm arrived running, gasping out that his mother had been bitten by an adder while working in the fields. The venom was spreading, and she was dying. Astrid immediately gathered what she needed. The twins came with her, as did Sigrid and the old skald, whose songs could slow poison's spread. Half the bishop's delegation followed, including Bishop Adalbert himself, to witness what would happen. They found the woman in her home, surrounded by her terrified family. Her leg was swollen, her breathing shallow, her skin grey with the venom's progress. The local healer had tried what remedies he knew, but it wasn't enough. Without intervention, she would be dead within hours. Astrid knelt beside the woman, assessing the damage with both her physical senses and her magical awareness. The venom had spread further than she'd hoped. This would take everything she had, combined with the twins' healing touch and the skald's power songs. This will require all of us working together, she told her companions. The venom needs to be drawn out and neutralized. The damaged tissue needs to be healed. Her spirit needs to be strengthened to endure the process. Are you ready? They nodded. Astrid looked up at Bishop Adalbert, who watched with his usual stern expression. You wanted to see what we do? Watch closely. This is Völva magic at its most essential. Life fighting death, skill against suffering, power used in service to need, she began. Her hands moved over the woman's leg, feeling for the threads of poison winding through blood and tissue. The twins placed their hands on the woman's temples, channeling healing energy directly into her weakened body. The old skald began to sing, ancient words in a language older than Norse, calling to the woman's spirit to hold on, to fight, to live. Sigrid stood at the foot of the bed, her small hands raised, her young power joining with the others to create a circle of healing energy. The air in the small room seemed to thicken, to shimmer with visible force. Astrid found the core of the venom, where it had concentrated near the woman's heart. This was the dangerous part. She would have to draw it out through her own body, using her Völva power to neutralize it as it passed through her. It would hurt. It might even cause her temporary damage, but it was the only way. She placed both hands over the woman's heart and pulled. Pain exploded through her. The venom felt like liquid fire, searing as it moved from the woman's body into her own. Astrid gasped, her body convulsing, but she didn't let go. She couldn't. The woman's life depended on her completing the transfer. Halvard stepped forward, his hands on Astrid's shoulders, lending her his mortal strength. I'm here. You're not alone. Finish it. Astrid pulled harder. The venom flowed into her, through her, and out into the earth beneath them, where her Völva power neutralized it and returned it to the natural cycle. The woman's color began to improve. Her breathing deepened. The grey tint faded from her skin. Finally, mercifully, it was done. Astrid collapsed backward into Halvard's arms, trembling and sweating. The twins caught the woman before she could fall, gently lowering her to the bed. The old skald's song shifted from urgency to peace, a lullaby of sorts, to help the woman rest and heal. The woman's husband knelt beside his wife, tears streaming down his face. She's breathing. Her color? She's going to live. Astrid managed a weak nod. Keep her rested for 3 days. Give her water with honey. The twins will check on her tomorrow to ensure all the venom is gone. She'll be weak for a while, but she'll recover fully. She looked up at Bishop Adalbert. The man's stern expression had finally cracked. He stared at the healed woman, at Astrid's exhausted form, at the community members who had worked together to save a life. That, Astrid said softly, is what Völva magic is. Not a threat to your faith, not corruption or darkness, just people using their gifts to serve others, to fight death and suffering, to heal what's broken. That's all we've ever been. The bishop said nothing, but something fundamental had shifted in his eyes. Doubt, perhaps. Or the first stirrings of understanding. Brother Clement knelt beside Astrid. "Let me help you back to the settlement. You've done enough for today." As they helped her to her feet, Astrid caught the bishop's gaze one more time. The certainty was gone from his face, replaced by something more human, more uncertain. It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was a beginning. Astrid spent 2 days recovering from the venom transfer. Her body had purged the poison, but the process had left her drained and shaken. Olvard stayed by her side, insisting she rest, despite her protests that there was work to be done. "The work will wait," he said firmly. "You nearly killed yourself saving that woman. Your community needs you whole, not martyred." On the 3rd day, Bishop Adalbert requested another private meeting. This time, Brother Clement accompanied him, along with 2 other members of the delegation. They found Astrid sitting in the meadow where she taught Sigrid, strong enough now to be outdoors, but not yet fully recovered. The bishop's demeanor had changed. The rigid certainty had softened into something approaching humility. He sat on the grass across from her, a gesture that would have been unthinkable during his first days here. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "I came here convinced of your evil, determined to find evidence to support my preconceptions. Instead, I've witnessed something that challenges everything I thought I knew." "An apology isn't necessary," Astrid replied. "You were protecting your flock the only way you knew how. I understand that, but you deserve it nonetheless." The bishop looked at his hands. "I've spent my entire life believing that the church holds the only key to salvation, that anything outside its teachings must be suspect. Watching you nearly die to save that woman's life, that shook something fundamental in me." Brother Clement leaned forward. "We've been debating among ourselves. What we've witnessed here, it's not witchcraft or demon work. It's something else entirely. Something that predates Christianity, that exists alongside it, rather than in opposition to it. That's what I've been trying to tell you," Astrid said gently. "The Velva way isn't a rejection of your faith. It's simply a different path to the same destination, serving others, alleviating suffering, protecting the vulnerable. We use different methods, speak in different languages, but our goals align more than they conflict." One of the other priests, an older man named Father Gregory, spoke up. "I've been reading through the records your community keeps. The healings, the assistance to travelers, the care for outcasts. It reminds me of accounts from the early church, before we became so concerned with doctrine and hierarchy, when the focus was simply on helping those in need. So what happens now?" Astrid asked, looking at each of them in turn. "You return to your superiors and report what you've seen. What will you tell them?" The bishop was quiet for a long moment. "The truth. That we found a community of gifted individuals using their abilities to serve others. That they pose no threat to the faithful, and in fact might serve as an example of how different traditions can coexist peacefully. Your superiors may not agree with that assessment. They may not. But I can't unsee what I've witnessed. I can't unknow what I now know." He met her eyes. "I can't promise you protection or acceptance from the church as a whole. But I can promise that I'll no longer be your adversary. And I'll argue for tolerance, for the possibility of peaceful coexistence. That's more than I dared hope for when you arrived." Brother Clement smiled. "You changed our minds not through argument or demonstration of power, but through simple, consistent service to others. That's a lesson my faith teaches, but we don't always practice it well. You've reminded me why I joined the church in the first place, to serve, not to judge." The meeting ended with an understanding rather than an agreement. The church's position on Velva magic wouldn't change overnight, but seeds of doubt had been planted. Questions had been raised, and that was enough. Over the following days, the delegation prepared to depart. But the atmosphere had transformed completely. The priests shared meals with the community, asked questions about Velva traditions, even participated in a simple blessing ceremony that incorporated elements from both Velva practice and Christian ritual. The evening before they were to leave, Father Gregory approached Astrid with a request that surprised her. "I have a nephew," he said quietly. "He's 12 years old and he has what you would call the sight. He dreams of things before they happen, sees spirits that others can't see. His parents are terrified. They've been trying to beat the gift out of him, thinking it's demonic." Astrid's heart clenched. "And you want to send him here, if you'll take him. If you'll teach him that his gift isn't a curse, but something to be understood and controlled. I can't protect him in my village. The fear is too strong. But here with you he might have a chance. Of course we'll take him. That's what this community is for." She paused. "But won't that put you at odds with your church? Sending a child to be trained by Völva?" "Probably. But I'd rather face that consequence than watch another gifted child be destroyed by ignorance and fear." The old priest smiled sadly. "Besides, I'm old. They can't do much to me beyond stripping my position, and honestly, that might be a relief at this point." On the morning of departure, the entire community gathered to see the delegation off. Bishop Adalbert addressed them one final time. "We came here as judges," he said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "We leave as witnesses, not to evil or corruption, but to a different way of living, a different understanding of how gifts can be used in service to others. I can't speak for the church as a whole, but I can speak for myself. You have my respect, and you'll have my advocacy in whatever small way I can offer it." Astrid stepped forward. "You're always welcome here, Bishop. All of you. Our doors remain open. Our fires burn for any who need warmth. That includes the church." As the delegation rode away, Sigrid slipped her hand into Astrid's. "Did we win?" "We didn't win or lose, little one. We simply existed honestly and let them draw their own conclusions. That's all we can ever do." But as Astrid watched the delegation disappear down the road, she felt something shift in the air around them. Not victory exactly, but a loosening of tension, a possibility where before there had been only conflict. The world was changing slowly, one opened mind at a time. Halvard came to stand beside her, his arm warm around her shoulders. "What are you thinking?" "That maybe we really can build something different here. A place where Völva gifts are celebrated, where the church and the old ways coexist, where being different doesn't mean being dangerous." She leaned into him. "It won't be easy. There will be more conflicts, more challenges. But today feels like a beginning. Every great change starts with a small shift," Halvard observed. "You've created that shift." "What?" "You build from here will echo for generations." Astrid thought about Father Gregory's nephew, about the other gifted children who would surely come once word spread that there was a safe place for them. She thought about the community she'd already built, the lives already changed. She thought about the bishop's grudging respect and Brother Clement's transformed faith. "We're not just building a sanctuary," she said softly. "We're building a bridge between worlds, between old magic and new faith, between fear and understanding, between the weight of the past and the possibility of the future. That's quite an ambition, I know. But then, I've always carried weight well." She smiled at her own joke, at how far she'd come from the woman who believed the village whispers about her worthlessness. "Besides, I have help. I have you. I have Sigrid. I have this community that grows stronger every day. Together, we can carry whatever weight the future brings." Sigrid tugged on her sleeve. "Can we practice fire calling now? I almost have it mastered." "Of course." Astrid looked down at the girl, seeing not just her student, but the future of everything they were building. "Show me what you've learned." As they walked toward the practice area, Astrid glanced back one more time at the road where the delegation had disappeared. She sent a silent wish after them. May they find the courage to speak truth even when it's unpopular, to question even when it's uncomfortable, to choose understanding over easy certainty. The future remained uncertain. Threats would come, challenges would arise. But today, in this moment, they had taken one small step toward a world where different paths could converge without destroying each other, where Völva magic and Christian faith might eventually recognize each other as different expressions of the same fundamental desire: to bring light into darkness, to heal what's broken, to serve something larger than oneself. It was enough. For now, it was enough. Summer arrived in full glory, and with it came the real work of building the sanctuary. The valley Halvad had purchased 2 days north of Skarvik, became the center of constant activity. Bjorn led the construction efforts, his years of farming translating well to the practical demands of building. Men from surrounding settlements came to help, drawn by stories of the community that had changed a bishop's mind. Astrid walked through the construction site on a warm afternoon, marveling at what was taking shape. The main hall was already framed, its bones reaching toward the sky like the ribs of some great creature. Around it, smaller buildings were emerging. Sleeping quarters, a dedicated healing house, a library that would rival Halvard's Mountain Hall, workshops for various crafts. "It's bigger than I imagined," she said to Halvard, who was reviewing plans with one of the carpenters. "It needs to be. Word is spreading faster than we anticipated." He pointed to a stack of letters on a nearby workbench. 3 more requests this week alone. Families asking if we'll take their gifted children. A woman in her 50s who's been hiding her healing abilities for decades. A man who can read the earth, predict where to dig wells and find ore. We'll need more teachers. More housing. We'll need more of everything. Halvard rolled up the plans. But that's a good problem to have. Better to be overwhelmed by success than defeated by failure. Sigrid appeared at Astrid's elbow, her face flushed with excitement. Aunt Astrid, Father Gregory's nephew, arrived. His name is Finn, and he's scared but trying to be brave. The twins are showing him around, but he asked for you. Astrid found Finn standing near the edge of the construction site, watching the activity with wide eyes. He was small for 12. Thin and wary in the way of children who've learned that the world isn't safe. The twins flanked him protectively, talking to him in low, soothing voices. "Finn," Astrid said gently, kneeling to his eye level. "I'm Astrid. Your uncle told me about you, about your gift of sight." The boy's eyes filled with tears. "It's not a gift. It's a curse. I see terrible things, dead people, accidents before they happen. I tried to stop seeing, but I can't." "Of course you can't. It's part of who you are, as much as the color of your eyes or the sound of your voice." Astrid touched his shoulder lightly. "But here's what your uncle may not have told you. The sight isn't just about seeing terrible things. It's about seeing truth. And with training, you can learn to control it, to use it to help rather than harm. Really. Really. I promise you, Finn, the gift that's made you feel cursed can become something you're proud of. It will take time and work, but you'll learn. And you'll never be punished for it here. Never beaten or called evil. You're safe now." The boy's tears spilled over and Astrid gathered him into her arms. He clung to her, small body shaking with relief and residual fear. She held him until the storm passed, then introduced him to Sigrid, who immediately declared she would be his friend and teacher. Watching them walk away together, Astrid felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders again. Each child who came to them carried trauma, fear, years of being told their gifts were wrong. Healing that damage would take more than teaching them to control their abilities. It would require patience, compassion, and a commitment to creating a truly safe space. "You're thinking too hard," Halvard said, coming to stand beside her. "I can practically hear the gears turning. I'm thinking about what we're building. It's more than just a sanctuary for people with gifts. It's a place where wounds heal, where children learn they're not monsters, where adults can finally stop hiding. That's a tremendous responsibility. Yes, and you're equal to it." He took her hand. "You've always been equal to it. You just needed to believe it yourself." That evening, as the workers departed and the community gathered for the evening meal, a stranger arrived. She was older, perhaps 50, with silver threading through her dark hair and eyes that held decades of carefully guarded secrets. She dismounted from her horse with the stiffness of someone who'd ridden hard for days. "I'm looking for Astrid Ragnardottir," she said. "I'm Astrid." Something about this woman set off warning bells in Astrid's mind. Not danger exactly, but significance. "What can I do for you?" The woman studied her for a long moment, then smiled. My name is Helga. I'm Velva-born, like you. And I've traveled from the eastern settlements because I heard something that seemed impossible. That someone had finally broken Halvard's curse. Astrid felt Halvard tense beside her. You know about the curse? I knew the Velva who cast it. Sigrun was my great-grandmother's sister. She was the most powerful seer I've ever known, and before she died she told me about the Viking warrior she'd cursed, about the test she'd set for him. Helga looked at Halvard. She also told me that if anyone ever succeeded in breaking the curse, they should seek me out, because there's something you need to know. The community had gone silent, everyone sensing the importance of this moment. Astrid gestured to the benches. Please, sit. Tell us what you know. Helga settled herself, accepting the cup of mead Bjorn offered. Sigrun didn't curse Halvard out of vengeance alone. She saw something in him, a thread in the tapestry of fate that was crucial. His curse wasn't just punishment. It was preparation. Preparation for what? Halvard asked, his voice tight. For the war that's coming. Not a war of swords and armies, but a war of beliefs. Christianity is spreading across the north, and with it comes a desire to stamp out the old ways completely. The church we know now, the one that sent Bishop Adalbert, is relatively tolerant. But there are factions within it that won't rest until every Velva is dead, every trace of the old magic eliminated. Astrid felt her blood run cold. How do you know this? Because I've seen it happening in the east. Communities destroyed, Velva burned, ancient knowledge lost forever. The church there doesn't debate or investigate. They simply destroy. Helga's expression was grim. It's coming here. Maybe not this year or next, but soon. And when it comes, you'll need every ally you can find. And Halvard's curse, his centuries of experience, his knowledge of how to survive when the world turns against you. Astrid understood suddenly. That's why Sigrun kept him alive. She saw that he would be needed, more than that. She saw that his redemption would create a bridge. A vampire who became human again, who learned compassion through suffering, who allied with Velva instead of fearing them. His story is powerful. It can change minds, open hearts, create possibilities where none existed before. Halvard shook his head slowly. 1,300 years of suffering because she thought I might be useful in some future conflict. 1,300 years of learning to be something more than you were, Helga corrected gently. Would you undo it? Knowing what you know now, would you choose to die rather than undergo the curse? The question hung in the air. Halvard looked at Astrid, at the community they'd built, at the sanctuary taking shape around them. Finally he shook his head. No, I wouldn't undo it. As much as I've suffered, it brought me here, to this moment, these people, this purpose. I wouldn't trade that. Then Sigrun's gamble paid off. Helga turned to Astrid, but her vision extended beyond Halvard. She saw you too as someone like you, a Velva powerful enough to break the curse, wise enough to understand what was needed, brave enough to build something new from the ashes of the old world. She saw all of this centuries ago. Seers like Sigrun don't see the future in clear images. They see possibilities, threads that might be woven together if the right people make the right choices. She set events in motion, but you're the one who brought them to fruition. That makes you crucial to what's coming. Astrid stood, walked to the edge of the firelight, her mind racing. A war of beliefs, factions that wanted to eliminate Velva completely. And somehow, she and Halvard were supposed to be instrumental in surviving it, maybe even preventing it. What do you want from us? And she asked, turning back to Helga. I want to stay, to add my knowledge to yours, my strength to this community. Because you're building something remarkable here, something that might actually survive the storm that's coming. And I'd like to be part of that, Helga smiled. Plus, I'm tired of hiding. Tired of pretending to be less than I am. You've created a place where we can finally be fully ourselves. That's worth fighting for. Astrid looked around at her community, at the sanctuary taking shape, at the future they were all building together. The weight on her shoulders grew heavier, but she stood straighter beneath it. This was what she was meant for, not just teaching gifted children or healing the sick, but building something that could withstand the coming storm. something that could bridge worlds and survive the clash of faiths. "Welcome to the community," she said to Helga. "We're going to need all the help we can get." Autumn came too quickly, painting the valley in gold and crimson. The main buildings of the sanctuary were complete now, solid and welcoming. 23 people lived there permanently, with more arriving each week. Vin had come into his gift under careful guidance, learning to control his visions rather than being controlled by them. Father Gregory's nephew now walked with confidence, no longer afraid of what he might see. Helga had become Astrid's right hand, her centuries of accumulated knowledge invaluable. She taught advanced techniques that even Astrid hadn't encountered, methods for storing power, for shielding against hostile magic, for working in concert with other Völva to amplify their collective strength. "You'll need these skills," Helga explained during one particularly intensive training session. "When the zealots come, and they will come, brute force won't save you. But strategy, coordination, and preparation might." One morning, Astrid woke with an uneasy feeling in her chest. She dressed quickly and found Halvard already awake, staring out the window at the rising sun with an expression she'd learned to recognize as trouble. "What is it?" she asked. "A dream or a memory?" "I'm not sure anymore." He turned to face her. "I dreamed of Magnus's daughter, Elena, the one who stayed with me a decade ago, the one marked remembered in my chronicle." "What about her?" "She's in danger. I don't know how I know, but I feel it with certainty." "Something's wrong." Astrid didn't question the instinct. She'd learned to trust Halvard's sense of things, honed by centuries of survival. "Where is she?" "3 days north. The settlement where I helped her start over." He grabbed his cloak. "I need to go to her. We'll go together." Astrid was already moving, gathering supplies. "Helga can manage things here for a few days. And if your instinct is right, you'll need backup." They left within the hour, riding hard through the autumn landscape. Halvard pushed the pace, that uneasy feeling clearly growing stronger the closer they got. Astrid felt it too, a wrongness in the air that made her Völva senses prickle with warning. They reached Elena's settlement on the 3rd day, and the wrongness became clear immediately. The village was too quiet, the doors closed despite the afternoon light. Smoke rose from only a handful of chimneys when there should have been many more. "Something's happened," Halvard said, dismounting carefully. An old woman appeared in a doorway, her face haggard with fear. "You shouldn't be here," she hissed. "The witch hunters came 2 days ago. They've taken Elena and 3 others. Say they're going to burn them for practicing dark magic." Astrid felt her blood turn to ice. "Where, the big clearing at the forest's edge. They're building the pyres now. The burning is set for sunset tomorrow." The woman's voice broke. "Her children are hidden, but Elena, she never did anything wrong. She just knew things, saw things. Helped people." Halvard's jaw clenched. "We're getting her out." "How?" "There are 30 witch hunters, all armed, all convinced they're doing God's work. And they have a priest with them, Brother Torsten. He's the one leading this, claiming Völva magic is spreading like plague and must be purged." Astrid's mind raced. 30 armed men, zealots convinced of their righteousness. A frontal assault would be suicide. But maybe there was another way. "Take us to where they're keeping the prisoners." The old woman led them through back paths to the edge of the settlement, where a hastily constructed prison stood. 4 women sat inside, chained and guarded by 6 men. Astrid recognized Elena from Halvard's description. Dark hair threaded with grey, eyes that held strength despite her circumstances. "We can't just attack," Astrid whispered. "But maybe we can give them a reason to let the women go." "What kind of reason?" "A miracle, or something that looks like one to their eyes." Astrid felt her Völva power stirring, responding to her need. "Helga taught me something about illusions, about making people see what they expect to see. If we can make it seem like divine intervention, like their own God is telling them to release the prisoners." Halvard understood immediately. A burning bush, or a pillar of fire. Something biblical, exactly. Brother Torsten will be harder to convince, but the common soldiers. They're just following orders. Show them a sign, give them a reason to believe they've made a mistake, and they might listen. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Astrid gathered specific herbs, materials that would burn with colored flames and thick smoke. She practiced the illusion magic Helga had taught her, shaping fire and light into forms that could pass for divine manifestation. Hilvard scouted the area, finding the best vantage points, planning their approach. As dusk fell, they moved into position. The witch hunters were gathered around the pyres they'd built, singing hymns and preparing for the next day's executions. Brother Thorsten stood at the center, his face alight with zealous certainty. Astrid waited until full dark, then began. She lit the special mixture of herbs and focused her power, shaping the flames that rose. The fire climbed into the sky, taking the form of a massive cross that blazed with golden light. Thunder rumbled overhead, though there were no storm clouds. The witch hunters fell silent, staring at the apparition. Astrid pushed harder, adding her voice to the illusion. It boomed across the clearing, impossibly deep and resonant. "You have erred," the voice proclaimed. "These women are innocent. Release them, or face divine judgment." Most of the soldiers dropped to their knees, terror and awe warring on their faces. But Brother Thorsten stepped forward, his face twisted with rage. "This is witchcraft," he shouted. "A trick to save the condemned. Don't listen. Is it witchcraft, brother?" Astrid's voice rang out as she stepped into the clearing, Halvard at her side. "Or is it the truth your heart doesn't want to hear? You're so convinced of your righteousness that you can't see when you're about to murder innocent people. You're one of them." Thorsten pointed at her. "Seize her too!" But the soldiers weren't moving. They stared at the burning cross still hanging in the air, at Astrid, who seemed to glow with inner light, at Halvard, whose presence radiated quiet authority. The illusion held, doubt spreading through their ranks like wildfire. "I am Völva," Astrid said clearly, "and I've used my gift to show you what you're too blind to see. These women are healers, helpers, mothers and daughters. They've never harmed anyone. The only evil here is the evil of ignorance masquerading as faith." One of the soldiers, younger than the others, fell to his knees. "I can't do this. I won't burn innocent women, even if they are witches, even if— No, this is wrong." Others echoed his sentiment. The certainty that had held the group together began to fracture. Thorsten saw it happening and lunged for Astrid, a knife appearing in his hand. But Halvard was faster. 1,300 years of combat experience, making his movements almost too quick to follow. He caught Thorsten's wrist, twisted, disarmed him without causing serious injury. "You've lost, priest," Halvard said quietly. "Your soldiers are deserting you. Your cause is revealed for what it is, fear pretending to be justice. Walk away now, while you still can." Thorsten sagged in his grip, the zealous fire in his eyes finally dimming. He looked around at his men, saw the doubt, the shame, the growing realization of what they'd almost done. With a broken sob, he collapsed to his knees. "I thought I was doing God's work," he whispered. "Perhaps you were," Astrid said, not unkindly. "Just not the work you believed. Perhaps you were meant to come here to see this, to learn that faith without compassion is just another form of violence. Take that lesson back to your brothers. Tell them what you've learned." The soldiers freed the prisoners, their hands shaking as they worked the locks. Elena emerged, bruised but unbroken, and her eyes found Halvard immediately. "You came. I knew you would." "Always," he said simply. As the witch hunters dispersed, their certainty shattered. Astrid let the illusion fade. The burning cross disappeared, leaving only stars and moonlight. She felt the drain of what she'd done, the power she'd expended, but also the satisfaction of lives saved without violence, of minds changed through demonstration rather than force. Elena approached Astrid, studying her with wise eyes. "You're the one who broke his curse. I can see it in you, the power you carry." "I am. Thank you." "For saving me." "For saving him." Elena touched Astrid's arm. "Sigrun would be proud of you, I think." She always believed redemption was possible. "For Halvard." "For all of us." They stayed in the village for 3 days, helping Elena resettle her frightened children, ensuring the witch hunters truly dispersed. And then they returned to the sanctuary, carrying with them the knowledge that the war Helga had warned about was already beginning. 5 years passed like water flowing over stones. each season leaving its mark, shaping the sanctuary into something beyond what Astrid had first imagined. The valley was now home to nearly 200 people, a true community bound by shared purpose and mutual acceptance. The library held thousands of texts, both Völva wisdom and Christian theology, sitting side by side on the shelves. Children ran through the courtyards, their laughter echoing off stone walls, their gifts celebrated rather than feared. Astrid stood on the hill overlooking the valley, watching the morning sun paint everything gold. She was 31 now, though the power she'd absorbed from breaking Halvard's curse meant she aged slowly. She would live for centuries, watching everyone she loved grow old and die. It was a weight she carried with grace, understanding it was part of her purpose. Halvard came up behind her, his hair now showing threads of silver. He would be mortal for perhaps another 30 years, if they were fortunate. They'd chosen not to seek another curse, another way to make him immortal. These years, these precious few decades together, were enough. Sigrid sent word, he said, handing her a letter. She's finished her training with the Völva in Iceland. She'll be home by summer. Astrid smiled, reading the letter. Sigrid was 20 now, powerful beyond measure, wise beyond her years. She'd left 3 years ago to study with the most accomplished Völva in the known world. And her letters spoke of discoveries that would benefit the entire community. She's ready to teach, Astrid said. That's good. We need more teachers if we're going to expand further, because expansion was necessary. What had started as one sanctuary was now becoming a network. Similar communities were forming across the north, each one inspired by what Astrid and Halvard had built. Not all were successful, and some faced violent opposition, but the idea itself had taken root. The possibility of peaceful coexistence between old ways and new faith was spreading. Bishop Adalbert visited twice a year now, bringing other church officials who were willing to learn. Brother Clement had joined the community permanently, his faith transformed rather than destroyed by proximity to Völva magic. He taught theology alongside Völva history, showing that both traditions asked similar questions about meaning and purpose, merely arriving at different answers. The Chronicle of Names that Halvard had kept for centuries now had a companion volume, one that Astrid maintained. But where Halvard's book recorded lost, fled, and forgotten, Astrid's recorded only one word beside each name: found. Every person who came to the sanctuary broken and left whole. Every child who learned their gift was blessing, not curse. Every adult who finally stopped hiding. All of them found. Father Gregory's nephew Finn was 18 now, a skilled seer who used his gift to help travelers find safe passage, to warn settlements of coming storms, to locate lost children before harm could befall them. The twins who had mended broken bones now taught healing to a dozen students. The old skald had died peacefully 2 winters past, but not before passing his power songs to 3 apprentices who sang them still. Bjorn had remarried, surprisingly. A widow from a neighboring settlement who'd lost her husband to illness had arrived seeking healing for her daughter. Bjorn had tended them both with patience and kindness, and something had bloomed between him and the woman. They lived in the valley now, his children grown and building their own lives. Her daughter apprenticing with the healers. "You're thinking about Skarvik," Halvard said. Reading her expression accurately, "I am. It seems so small now, that settlement and its narrow definitions of worth. I wonder if they ever think about me, the woman they dismissed as too heavy to wed. If they do, they must wonder how that dismissed woman became the founder of the most influential community in the north. How she changed a bishop's mind, built bridges between faiths, and created something that will outlast all of us." Astrid touched the silver brooch at her shoulder, her mother's brooch that she still wore after all these years. "I was never too heavy. I was carrying the weight of destiny, of magic my bloodline had borne for generations. My mother tried to put that weight down and it destroyed her. I chose to carry it, and it made me strong." Helga appeared at the crest of the hill, breathing hard from the climb despite her Völva vitality. "There's a delegation arriving from the far north. They say they have something important to discuss." The delegation was led by a woman who looked remarkably like Astrid herself. Same dark hair, same build, same eyes that held power carefully contained. She introduced herself as Ragnar, named for Astrid's mother, and claimed descent from the same Velva line. "I've come because I need to understand how you did it," Ragnar said that evening, as they sat around the great hall's hearth. "How you built this place, convinced the church to tolerate you, created space for Velva to exist openly. In my region, we're still hiding, still afraid. The witch hunters burn anyone suspected of magic." Astrid looked around the hall at her community, at everything they'd built together. "I didn't do it alone. That's the first lesson. We did it together, Velva and mortals, believers and skeptics, all of us choosing cooperation over conflict. But how do you convince people to cooperate? How do you change minds that are already closed? You don't force it. You simply exist honestly and openly, and you let your actions speak for themselves. You heal the sick, you help the lost, you serve your community. Eventually, some people will notice. They'll question their assumptions. And those people will influence others. It sounds too simple. It is simple. But simple doesn't mean easy." Astrid gestured to Halvard. "This man was cursed for 13 centuries because a Völva believed he could change. And he did. If someone that damaged can find redemption, if someone that lost can be found, then any mind can be opened." Given time and patience, Ragnar stayed for 3 months, learning not just Völva magic, but the philosophy that underpinned the sanctuary. She watched how disputes were resolved through discussion rather than decree, how children were taught to question rather than simply obey, how different beliefs coexisted without destroying each other. When she finally left, she carried with her not just knowledge, but hope. Summer brought Sigrid home, taller and more powerful than when she'd left. She swept into the sanctuary like a storm, embracing everyone, sharing stories of her travels and studies. That night, the entire community gathered for a celebration. Astrid watched Sigrid dance with Finn, watched Halvard laugh with Bjorn, watched the children practice fire calling under careful supervision. She felt the weight of everything she carried, the centuries ahead of her, the responsibility of maintaining what they'd built. But she also felt joy, pure and simple, at what they'd accomplished. "She's proud of you, you know," a voice said beside her. Astrid turned to find an old woman she'd never seen before, ancient beyond measure, with eyes white with the sight. She knew somehow who this was, even though it was impossible. "Sigrun," she breathed. The Velva smiled. "Not truly. I died centuries ago, but my spirit lingers in the magic I wove, watching to see if my gamble would pay off. And it has, beyond my wildest hopes. You saw all of this? Planned it. I saw possibilities, threads that might weave together if the right souls chose correctly. You chose correctly, Astrid. You took the weight you were given and turned it into strength. You took a curse and made it blessing. You took rejection and built acceptance. I'm still rejected in some places. There are still those who want to destroy us. There always will be. Fear is a constant. But so is courage, so is hope. You've created something that will endure, that will grow, that will outlast the darkness trying to smother it. Sigrun's form began to fade. My work is done. The rest is up to you and those who come after. Guard what you've built. But more than that, teach others to build their own sanctuaries, their own communities. Spread this possibility like seeds on the wind. Wait, Astrid called, but the Völva was gone, leaving only the sense of blessing, of approval, of completion. Halvard found her standing alone, tears on her cheeks. What happened? An ending, she said, and a beginning. She looked out at her community, at the sanctuary that had started as a desperate dream and become solid reality. She thought of all the sanctuaries to come, all the Völva who would find their way here or to places like this. She thought of the centuries ahead, of the work still to be done, of the bridges still to be built. She was no longer the woman considered too heavy to wed. She was Astrid Ragnardottir, Völva and founder, bridge builder and cursebreaker. She was exactly what she was meant to be, carrying the weight of magic and destiny. With strength earned through suffering and choice. Some love stories don't begin with a choice, but the ones that matter are defined by the choices that follow. And every choice she'd made, from accepting Halvard's contract to building this sanctuary, had led her here. To this moment of perfect clarity, perfect purpose, perfect peace. The future stretched before her, full of challenge and possibility in equal measure. She would face it as she'd faced everything else, with courage, with compassion, and with the unshakable knowledge that she was enough. She always had been.